The Duke of Alder-mere placed the papers beside the cracked silver inkstand and waited for his wife to break. London, 1864, had not yet shaken the morning mist from its windows, and Alder-mere House stood in Mayfair with all its polished silence intact. The breakfast room was bright with pale winter light, too bright for mercy. It glanced off the white china, the silver tea service, the untouched toast cooling on a porcelain rack, and the black ribbon around the solicitor's packet that lay between husband and wife like a small coffin. Her Grace, Cressida Vane, Duchess of Alder-mere, sat with her gloved hands folded in her lap. Across the table, His Grace, Gideon Vane, Duke of Alder-mere, watched her with the expression London had learned to fear. It was the face he wore before dismissing stewards, ending alliances, or ruining men who had mistaken restraint for weakness. This morning, he wore it for his wife. "You understand what these are?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled, almost courteous. Cressida looked not at his face, but at the black ribbon. "I understand enough." The answer did not please him. A woman accused of betraying her husband's name was meant to tremble. A wife confronted with separation was meant to plead. At the very least, she was meant to ask which part of her life had just been declared unworthy of keeping. Cressida did none of those things. She sat very still in a gown of soft grey silk that made her seem carved from morning shadow. Her fair hair was arranged with its usual discipline. No curl had been allowed the liberty to fall. No ornament drew attention to her throat or wrists. Even her wedding ring seemed quiet, a narrow circle of gold that Gideon had once placed upon her finger without understanding how completely a small act could bind two lives together. He pushed the packet toward her. "Mr. Bellamy has prepared the terms. A deed of separation, with provisions for your residence, allowance, and personal effects. There is also a draft petition, should public proceedings become unavoidable." He paused, studying her face. "I have been advised to settle the matter privately, if you are sensible." At that, her eyes lifted. They were not tearful. That was the first thing that struck him. The second was worse. They were tired. "How considerate of everyone," she said. Gideon's fingers tightened against the edge of the table. "This is not an occasion for irony." "No," she said softly. "It is not." The quietness of it cut more sharply than defiance. He had prepared himself for anger. He had prepared himself for denial. He had prepared himself for tears, hysterics, explanations, perhaps some elegant variation of betrayal dressed as misunderstanding. He had not prepared himself for this grave composure, as though she had been walking toward this table for months, and he alone had failed to hear her steps. The cracked silver inkstand sat between them, its lid marked by a thin fracture near the hinge. Gideon noticed her glance at it. It had belonged to his grandfather, a heavy old piece engraved with the Alder-mere crest. He kept it in his study, not the breakfast room. It should not have been there, but he had brought it down himself, because the solicitor's clerk had forgotten ink, and Gideon had wanted the morning finished without delay. He wanted the signature. He wanted the scandal contained. He wanted the ache behind his ribs to become anger again, because anger was simpler. Cressida reached for the ribbon and untied it with steady fingers. The sound of silk sliding loose seemed indecently loud in the room. She read the first page, then the second. Her eyes moved with careful attention. Not the panic of a woman discovering ruin, but the clarity of one confirming what she had already known. Gideon could not endure it. "You may take time to consider." She turned a page. "Have you given me time to be believed?" His jaw set. "Do not turn this upon me. I would not presume to turn anything upon you, Your Grace. You have arranged everything so neatly. The title landed like frost. Your Grace, not Gideon, not husband, not even my lord, softened by habit." She had used his rank as a wall, and he had no right to resent a wall built from stones he had handed her. Still, resentment rose. It was easier than shame. "You were named in correspondence with Lord Osric Fenwick," he said. "Estate matters were copied in your hand. Private information concerning the House of Alder-mere was found where it should never have been. You had opportunity, access, and motive." Cressida looked up then. For the first time, something moved in her face. It was not fear. It was the faint, almost invisible wound of a woman hearing that the person who should have known her best had made an inventory of her guilt. Motive, she repeated. What motive did Mr. Bellamy? That assat is not the point. It is usually the point when one is accused. Do you deny the letters? Would it matter? It would matter if you told the truth. Her hand stilled on the page. Outside, carriage wheels passed over the wet stones of the square. Somewhere in the hall, a footman moved and then stopped, no doubt sensing the charged hush behind the breakfast room door. Cressida's gaze did not leave her husband's face. The truth is not a coin I can place in your palm and make you value it. Gideon stood. The chair moved back against the carpet with a muted scrape. He had not meant to stand. He had meant to remain seated, cold, judicial, master of himself and of the situation. But she had a way of remaining quiet that made his control feel exposed. You think dignity will save you? He asked. No, her voice remained level. I think it may save what is left of me. The answer struck the room into silence. Gideon stared at her. For one dangerous instant, the legal packet, the forged letters, Lord Osric's smooth insinuations, Lady Portia Selwyn's careful concern, all of it seemed to recede. He saw instead a woman sitting alone at the far end of too many dinner tables. A woman who had learned the accounts of Westmere Hall because he had left her with silence and duty for company. A woman who had once waited in a blue evening gown at the foot of the staircase while he sent word that he would attend the opera without her. The memory came unwanted, and because it was unwanted, he crushed it. If you sign, there will be no returning to ignorance, he said. There rarely is. She drew the top document closer. The cracked inkstand waited. Gideon saw, absurdly, the fine line in its lid again. He could not remember when it had broken. He remembered everything else about his possessions. He knew which decanter had belonged to his father, which portrait had been rehung after his mother's mourning, which marble table in the hall had a chip hidden beneath a bronze urn. Yet he could not remember the fracture in the inkstand he used nearly every day. Cressida removed her right glove. The action was small, proper, and devastating. Her bare hand was pale against the dark wood. The wedding ring flashed once in the weak light. She took the pen, dipped it into the ink, and held it above the page for a single breath. Gideon expected hesitation. He leaned into it without meaning to. He wanted it. He hated that he wanted it. He wanted some proof that the marriage had not been a convenience she could step out of as easily as a carriage. He wanted to see pain, because pain would mean he had not been alone in this ruin. Cressida signed, Cressida Vane. Her handwriting was elegant, slanted, unmistakably hers. The black ink darkened as it dried. She signed the next page as well, then the next. No sob caught in her throat, no pen slipped from her fingers. When she finished, she placed the pen neatly beside the cracked inkstand, as though she had completed a household order rather than ended a marriage. Gideon did not move. The victory he had demanded lay before him, signed and witnessed by no one but the two people it destroyed. It tasted of ash. Cressida slid the packet back across the table. There. You have what you asked for. He looked at her signature. You did not even hesitate. A faint sadness touched her mouth. It was gone almost at once. I hesitated for 2 years. The words found him before he could defend himself. He had no answer. She stood, smoothing the front of her gown. He noticed, with an irritation that was almost panic, that she had eaten nothing. The tea in her cup remained untouched. How many mornings had passed this way, with her seated across from him, silent and hungry for something he refused to name. She reached for her wedding ring. For a moment, he thought she meant to twist it, to cling to it, to make some final appeal to sentiment. Instead, she drew it from her finger and set it beside the papers. The tiny sound of gold meeting wood was softer than a dropped pin and heavier than judgment. Cressida. Her name left him before pride could stop it. She looked at him then, fully. The breakfast room seemed to narrow around her face, around the stillness in her eyes. You asked for my signature, Your Grace, she said. You don't get my grief as well. He flinched. It was almost nothing. A tightening at the corner of his mouth, a fractional loss of breath. But she saw it. Of course she saw it. She had spent 2 years learning to read what he would not say. Gideon forced his hand to rest flat against the table. "Where will you go, Bath?" "Aunt Honoria will receive me." "You arranged this already?" "A woman learns to prepare when she is not permitted to hope." He looked toward the door, then back at her. "The settlement is generous. Keep the generosity if it is meant to purchase silence. That is not what it is. Then I shall consider it later." She put her glove back on with maddening care. Every motion was civilized. Every motion took her farther away from him. "My trunks will be ready within the hour. I shall take only what was mine before this house taught me how little a duchess can own." "You speak as though you were mistreated." She paused at that, one hand on the back of her chair. "No, Your Grace, I speak as though I was unseen. There is a difference, though I don't expect you to know it." The door opened beneath her hand. Morning light from the hall touched the grey silk of her gown. For one wild, humiliating moment, Gideon nearly crossed the room. He nearly caught her wrist. He demanded that she stay until he understood why her leaving felt less like punishment than loss. But he did none of those things. He was the Duke of Alder-mere, and men like him did not beg. Cressida stepped into the hall without looking back. The door closed with a quiet click. Only then did Gideon look down. A small bead of ink had fallen from the pen and spread across the old fracture in the silver inkstand, darkening the crack until it looked like a wound freshly opened. For the first time that morning, the ruthless Duke had exactly what he had asked for, and for the first time in his marriage, he was afraid he had asked for the wrong thing. By the time Cressida's carriage left Alder-mere House, Gideon had returned the wedding ring to the table 3 times and taken it up twice, as if the small circle of gold were some legal instrument whose meaning might change if he examined it from another angle. It did not. It lay in his palm with an insulting lightness, warm from his skin and cold in every other way. Beyond the breakfast room door, the household moved with the careful quiet of servants who knew too much and wished to be accused of noticing nothing. Wheels sounded in the square. A trunk strap creaked, a footman murmured. Then the front door closed, and the silence that followed did not belong to Mayfair or to morning. It belonged to the beginning of an absence. Gideon stood very still until the house settled around him. He had expected relief. He had secured the papers, contained the scandal, and sent the woman, whose name had been linked to Lord Osric Fenwick, away from his table. Any reasonable man would have felt the clean satisfaction of decisive action. Instead, he felt the weight of a question he had not asked in time. What had Cressida done with her grief before she learned to deny him the sight of it? He placed the ring beside the cracked inkstand and saw against his will. Another morning 2 years earlier at Westmere Hall, when Cressida had arrived as his bride beneath a sky, the colour of pewter. She had been Lady Cressida Marley then, the eldest daughter of a respectable but diminished family, neither celebrated for beauty, nor dismissed for plainness, neither rich enough to be hunted, nor poor enough to be pitied openly. Their marriage had been praised as prudent. Her father had called it a blessing. Gideon's solicitor had called it convenient. Gideon had called it necessary. Cressida had said nothing at all. When she first stepped into the great entrance hall at Westmere, where ancestral portraits stared down from dark walls and the flagstones held the chill of centuries. She had looked too slight for the house, he remembered. Not weak, never that. Merely outnumbered by stone, title, history, and servants, waiting to see what sort of duchess she would become, Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, had curtsied. The steward had bowed. Gideon had introduced them in his clipped manner, and then excused himself to review correspondence that could easily have waited. He had told himself she would prefer rest after traveling nearly 200 miles. He had not seen her face when he left. He saw it now in memory with merciless clarity. She had stood beneath the carved oak staircase, with her gloves still buttoned, smiling as if abandonment were only another rule of etiquette she intended to master. In the months that followed, Cressida became useful with a speed that irritated those who had expected her to be decorative. She learned the household accounts first, because they were placed before her, with the assumption that she would sign where instructed. She did not sign, she read every page. On the third week, she summoned Mr. Hargreaves, the steward, and asked why candles for the north wing cost enough to illuminate a chapel for a month. On the fifth, she discovered that the dairy accounts had been rounded upward by a clever clerk who believed a duchess would not know the price of butter. On the seventh, she had the linen rooms inventoried and found 24 sheets listed as replaced, though never ordered. She made no public accusation. She merely corrected the figures, sent quiet notes, and allowed each guilty person the discomfort of knowing she had seen the truth and chosen order over spectacle. Her Grace is particular, Mr. Hargreaves told Gideon one evening in the estate office, with the sour expression of a man who disliked female intelligence when it came with a ledger. Gideon had looked up from a letter. Accuracy is not a vice. No, Your Grace. But the tenants have begun bringing petitions to her, then answer them before they reach her. The steward's mouth tightened. Gideon remembered that. What he had not remembered until now was the next petition, because Cressida had brought it herself. It concerned Mrs. Elspeth Dern, a widow with 3 children, and a cottage nearly 4 miles from the main drive. Her husband had died after a fever, and arrears had accumulated during the winter. Mr. Hargreaves had marked the cottage for removal from the tenancy roll. Cressida had entered Gideon's study, carrying the petition in both hands, as if paper could become a living thing if held with enough care. Mrs. Dern can pay half by Michaelmas if the roof is repaired, she had said. Gideon had been sealing a reply to a political associate in London. The estate is not a charity. No, she said. It is a responsibility. He had looked at her then, truly looked, if only for a moment. She wore a brown morning gown with a ribbon at the throat, and a strand of fair hair had escaped near her cheek. There was no performance in her expression, no attempt to charm him. Only conviction, steady and inconvenient. You have been Duchess for 7 weeks, he said, and Mrs. Dern has been hungry for longer than that. The answer should have annoyed him. It did. It also stayed with him. You speak as though I put her there. I speak as though you can prevent her being put out. He had set down the seal. You're asking me to overrule my steward. I'm asking you to read what he didn't. He should have dismissed her. Instead, he took the petition. The roof was repaired before the first hard rain. Mrs. Dern remained in the cottage. Cressida never thanked him for it, because she had not pleaded for a favor. She had asked him to do what was right. That, too, had irritated him. It had also made him sign the order before breakfast the next morning. Over time, Westmere Hall altered under her hands if they so quiet that Gideon mistook them for the house functioning as it always had. Servants stopped leaving after a single quarter. The kitchens wasted less. Tenant petitions became fewer because repairs were made before desperation turned formal. The nursery wing, empty since Gideon's own childhood, was aired every Thursday, though there were no children to use it. The chapel flowers were replaced without extravagance. The old tenants received blankets before the first frost. When Gideon came down from London, dinner appeared, fires were laid, correspondence was sorted, and the household bowed as one body. He called it efficiency. Society called it propriety. Cressida, he now understood too late, had called none of it anything. She had simply done the work. Yet London never loved a woman for labor it could not gossip about. At dinners, she was praised in the tone reserved for furniture of excellent quality. Such a proper duchess, Lady Portia Selwyn had once said over tea, her smile smooth as cream, so steady, so useful. Some women are born to be admired, but others are made for management. The ladies around her had laughed lightly, as if no wound could be hidden inside a compliment. Cressida had inclined her head. A well-managed house is less likely to collapse upon those admiring themselves inside it. Gideon had heard the remark from across the drawing room. He had nearly smiled, nearly. Lady Portia had not. She had studied Cressida with a new brightness in her eyes, the way a woman might examine a locked cabinet after discovering it contained more than linen. Later that same afternoon, Portia had approached Cressida with a charity subscription book, bound in green leather. The cause was widows of retired naval officers, or so she said. "Only your name, dear Duchess," she had murmured. "Your hand is so elegant. It will encourage everyone else to give," Cressida had signed. Gideon remembered seeing the book pass from Portia's gloved fingers to a footman's tray. He remembered because Cressida had used his pen, the one from the silver inkstand in his study, after Portia claimed her own had gone dry. At the time, the detail meant nothing. Now it came back with the force of a door opening in a dark room. His gaze dropped to the inkstand beside the separation papers. The fracture near the hinge was fine, but not old enough to be inherited. He knew that suddenly. He knew it with the same certainty with which he knew Cressida's ring did not belong on a breakfast table. He picked up the inkstand and turned it toward the window. A crack caught the light. A faint shadow of dried ink lay beneath the lip, darker than the rest, as though the lid had once been struck or forced. "Your Grace?" The voice came from the doorway. Mrs. Hadley, the Mayfair housekeeper, stood with her hands folded, her face disciplined but pale. "Her Grace's trunks have gone ahead. The carriage has left for Bath." Gideon set the inkstand down too quickly. The sound rang against the table. "I am aware." Mrs. Hadley did not move. "There is one matter, Your Grace." Her Grace asked that the grey sitting room be left as it is until your instruction. "Why?" She said it contains only house property. Of course she had. Cressida would not take a cushion if she believed it belonged to Alder-mere. She would leave comfort behind rather than be accused of theft by a house that had already accepted worse of her. Gideon dismissed the housekeeper with a nod, but when the door closed, he did not return to the legal packet. He stood instead with the ring in one hand and the cracked inkstand before him, while memory arranged itself into a pattern he did not yet want to see. Lady Portia's soft praise, the borrowed pen, the green subscription book, Cressida's careful hand, the steward's resentment, the forged letters, Lord Osric Fenwick's polished concern. For 2 years, Gideon had believed his wife's silence was emptiness. Now the house she had kept alive seemed to breathe around him, each ordered room accusing him more quietly than any woman could. On the table, the black ink had dried across Cressida's signature. It looked final, it looked obedient, it looked like exactly what he had demanded. But for the first time since the accusations began, Gideon wondered whether the most useful Duchess in England had not betrayed his house at all. Perhaps she had been the only person inside it who had never done so. The memory of Lady Portia Selwyn's musical evening did not return to Gideon as an event. It returned as sound first, a harp. String trembling in a crowded drawing room, a woman's laugh cut too neatly at the edges, and Cressida's voice made quieter by the knowledge that no one in the room was listening kindly. It had been 3 weeks before the papers on the breakfast table. London had been shining with the polished cruelty of the season, and Lady Portia's house near Grosvenor Square had opened its doors to half the people who mattered, and all the people who wished to be seen mattering. Portia was the widowed daughter of the Earl of Selwyn, still beautiful in a deliberate way, with dark hair dressed beneath pearls, and a smile that never arrived before she had measured its usefulness. She was not powerful enough to command a duke, but she knew how to place whispers where pride would hear them. Cressida had arrived shortly after 8 o'clock, not on Gideon's arm, because Gideon had sent word from his club that a political dinner had detained him. The message had been proper. The effect had not been. A duchess entering without her husband could still hold a room if the room wished to be generous. This room did not. It turned toward her with silk rustling and eyes brightening, and then it turned away by degrees, as if her presence had been noted, weighed, and found useful only as a subject for later conversation. Cressida accepted Lady Portia's greeting with a calm that cost her more than any jewel she wore. Her gown was pale blue, modest, elegant and too restrained, to compete with the unmarried girls displayed beneath chandeliers. She had chosen it because a duchess need not glitter to prove rank. The women present chose to see it differently. "How brave of you to come alone, Your Grace," said Lady Caverley, who collected other people's discomfort the way some women collected porcelain. "I don't know that I'd dare it, but then I have always been timid," Cressida smiled. "Then we must be grateful you have never been required to confuse company with courage." One or two ladies looked into their fans. Portia's smile did not move, but her eyes sharpened. "Dear Duchess, you always say such interesting things. Come, you must sit near me. I want everyone to see how well we keep our Alder-mere treasure polished. Treasure, polished, useful." The words drew a soft laugh from the women nearest her. Cressida allowed herself to be led toward a seat near the music stand, where she would be visible from every corner and protected by no one. She understood the placement at once. Portia had set her like a vase in the center of a table and invited the room to comment on whether it was cracked. A young soprano began an Italian song. Conversation dimmed, but did not vanish. It traveled beneath the music, passing behind gloves and fans. Cressida heard her own name once, then Lord Osric Fenwick's, then the phrase "lonely women." She kept her hands folded. She did not look toward the door. She had long ago learned that hope became more humiliating when witnesses saw it waiting. Lord Osric appeared beside her at the end of the song, with a glass of lemonade he had not been asked to bring. He was handsome in the polished, careless manner of younger sons who lived on charm and unpaid bills. His fair hair curled over his brow, as though arranged by accident. His bow was too low for the acquaintance between them. "Your Grace," he said, offering the glass. "You look abandoned. I couldn't allow that." Cressida did not take it. "How fortunate that appearances are often unreliable." "Not always," he said, smiling. "Sometimes a room tells the truth before people dare to." The women nearest them pretended not to listen, and listened with their entire bodies. Cressida felt the trap before she saw its shape. Osric was standing a little too close. His voice was a little too low. Portia, across the room, had turned just enough to watch without seeming to. "Lord Osric," Cressida said with the cool courtesy of her rank, "you mistake proximity for conversation. Please do step back." A small silence opened. Osric laughed as if she had teased him. "You're severe tonight. I am precise most nights. Then I won't risk your displeasure." He stepped back, but not before the glass tilted in his hand. A drop of lemonade fell onto the carpet near her slipper. It gave him an excuse to bend. As he did, a folded note slipped from his sleeve and landed beside Cressida's chair. It was small, cream-colored, and sealed badly enough that the edge gaped open. The movement was too smooth to be an accident. Cressida saw the first line before she could stop herself from seeing it. "My dear O." The handwriting looked like hers, not perfectly, not to her own eye, but enough for a boardroom, enough for a husband who had never studied her private hand with tenderness. She did not bend to pick it up. That was the choice on which everything balanced. If she touched it, it became hers. If she ignored it, someone else would notice and make a theater of discovery. She looked at Osric instead. "You have dropped something." His expression flickered, only for a second. "Have I? Yes." She turned slightly toward a footman. "Please, return Lord Osric's note to him." The footman stepped forward. Portia's eyes flashed, then softened at once into amusement. The note changed hands. Osric took it with an elegance that did not quite conceal irritation. "How observant you are, Duchess. It is a habit one acquires when people become careless." A murmur passed through the nearby chairs. It was not admiration. It was appetite denied. Portia rose with perfect timing and crossed the room as the next performer approached the pianoforte. "Is there some little confusion?" she asked. "Nothing worth troubling a hostess," Cressida said. Lord Osric misplaced his correspondence. "How odd." Portia looked at Osric, then at Cressida. A gentleman's private notes wandering near a lady's chair. "London will begin inventing novels if we don't supervise it." Cressida met her gaze. "Then we must hope London learns to read better ones." Portia laughed lightly, but color touched her cheek. The pianist began, and for a few minutes the music covered the room's disappointment. Cressida sat through it without moving. Her pulse was steady, because she demanded that it be steady. Her throat ached, because dignity did not make humiliation painless. She had been placed on display. She had refused the first bait. That did not mean there would not be a second. She knew it when Portia leaned close during the applause and said, "You are wonderfully composed, dear Cressida." Some women would be distressed by such attention. Some women invite attention and call it concern. "Oh, don't be unkind. I'm only thinking of you." "Then think more quietly." Portia's smile thinned. Before she could answer, the drawing room shifted. Gideon had entered. He stood just inside the doors in evening black, tall, unsmiling, and instantly central. Mothers adjusted their daughters' positions. Men straightened. Even Portia's musicians seemed to remember that a duke changed the weight of a room simply by occupying it. Cressida felt the old, foolish part of her lift toward him. She hated that part. It still believed arrival might mean rescue. Gideon's gaze found her first. Then it moved to Osric, who remained near enough to imply what he had failed to prove. Cressida saw the calculation in her husband's face. She saw discomfort noticed, then misunderstood. He crossed the room with controlled steps. "Lord Osric," he said. "You are attentive tonight." Osric bowed. "Only where courtesy requires it, Your Grace." Cressida wanted Gideon to ask whether she was well. She wanted one private question in a public room. Instead, he looked at her and said, "Has Lord Osric been entertaining you?" The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Nearby fans stilled. Cressida looked at her husband, and something inside her withdrew from the doorway where hope had been standing. "No," she said. "He has been instructive." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "In what sense?" "In the difference between attention and respect." For a moment, they stood close enough to appear united, and far enough apart for everyone to feel the distance. Portia glided in, serene again. "Your Grace, how fortunate. The Duchess has been quite the center of our little evening." Gideon did not look away from his wife. "So I see. It was not protection." Not yet. It was possession sharpened by doubt, and Cressida felt the room enjoy it. Portia's hand brushed Cressida's sleeve as she turned, a gesture as intimate as friendship and as cold as warning. "A woman should be careful where she leaves her hand," she murmured. Cressida heard the words clearly. Gideon heard only the softness of them and saw only Cressida's face closing once more. Later, he would remember the folded note. He would remember Osric's false ease. He would remember Portia standing exactly where she needed to stand, to see everything, and be blamed for nothing. But that night, he remembered only the sting of entering a room and finding his wife at the center of whispers. Pride gave him an explanation before love could ask a question. And Cressida, who had waited 2 years to be seen, learned that a duke could look directly at her and still miss the truth. The accusation reached Gideon not as a shout, but as a folded packet delivered beneath Lord Osric Fenwick's immaculate glove. It came the morning after Lady Portia's musical evening, when London was still pretending that nothing improper had happened, while ensuring that everyone had heard about it by breakfast. Gideon had gone to White's before noon, intending to spend half an hour among men who discussed politics because private life was less manageable. He found Lord Osric waiting near the bow window with a newspaper open in his hands and no interest in the print. That was Gideon's first warning. Men in debt often developed a talent for looking idle while waiting to be useful. "Your Grace," Osric said, rising with a bow that was respectful enough to pass and familiar enough to irritate. "I hoped for a word." Gideon removed his gloves slowly. "Then choose it well." Osric smiled as if the sharpness amused him. "Discretion." Gideon's gaze dropped to the packet. Cream paper. Blue thread, no seal. "That is rarely brought to a club, in one's hand. I didn't know where else to bring it without appearing more dramatic than the matter deserves." The matter? The room did not change. Men still spoke near the fire. A servant still crossed with a tray. Somewhere behind Gideon, a laugh rose and fell. yet the air around him narrowed until only Osric remained in it. "You will be careful," Gideon said. Osric looked almost wounded. "I intend to be. That is why I came to you before others forced the matter into uglier hands." He offered the packet. Gideon did not take it at once. "Explain yourself." "There were letters. I did not invite them. At first, I assumed Her Grace merely wished for conversation. Many ladies of rank do. Their lives are lonely in ways gentlemen prefer not to notice." Gideon's expression hardened. "You are not improving your position." "No, forgive me. I only mean that I did not understand the gravity until estate matters appeared in her hand. References to Fenwick investments, a copied account from Westmere, and names of tenants attached to leases under Alder-mere authority. I realized then that I might be drawn into something improper." Gideon heard the words and hated them for arranging themselves into sense. Cressida, alone at Portia's. Cressida near Osric. A note dropped at her feet, her calm, her refusal to explain. Pride moved faster than reason. It always had when shame stood nearby. He took the packet. "If this is a fabrication, I will end you." Osric lost color. That at least appeared genuine. "I wouldn't risk bringing falsehood to you. Men have risked more for less." Gideon broke the thread. The first letter was brief, intimate in implication but not in language. That was clever. Too clever. It spoke of gratitude for understanding, of information enclosed, of a household where one learned silence. The signature was full CV. His eyes moved to the second page. A copied estate account. Names, sums, margins, notations. The hand was Cressida's, or close enough that the difference struck him as insult rather than proof. A line near the bottom referred to a Fenwick subscription arrangement that should never have left Alder-mere papers. Gideon folded the page with care. "Who has seen these?" "No one I could prevent." "That is not an answer." Osric looked toward the window. "Lady Portia saw enough last night to become concerned." "I believe she means to call upon you." "Of course she did." By 4 o'clock, Lady Portia Selwyn sat in Gideon's study at Alder-mere House, with her morning black gloves folded in her lap, and concern arranged upon her face like a veil. The study was a severe room of dark shelves, green leather chairs, and winter light filtered through high windows. The silver inkstand rested upon the desk near Gideon's right hand. He had not noticed the crack then. He noticed nothing but the pages spread before him and the woman across from him, speaking gently enough to make every sentence more poisonous. "I begged Lord Osric not to be hasty," Portia said. "Young men are vain, and vanity makes them imagine women admire them when they are only bored. But after last night, I couldn't remain entirely silent." "You saw something?" Gideon asked. "I saw Her Grace placed in a very difficult position. That is not what I asked." Portia lowered her gaze. "I saw familiarity, not vulgarity. Never that. Cressida is too composed for vulgarity. But there are forms of attachment that survive precisely because they remain elegant." Gideon's hand closed around the edge of a letter. "And you believe these letters are hers?" "I believe the hand is hers. That is not the same thing." "No," Portia said softly. "It isn't. But men in your position cannot afford to wait until uncertainty becomes public certainty." That sentence struck the oldest bruise in him. His father had waited. His father had dismissed rumors as beneath him, ignored small irregularities in accounts, refused to believe a charming woman and a trusted associate could make sport of a great house. By the time he acted, money was gone, dignity was torn, and the name Vane had been spoken in rooms where servants carried gossip faster than letters. Gideon had been 21 and old enough to understand that ruin seldom arrived, wearing its true face. "Leave the matter with me," he said. Portia rose. She did not smile. That made her performance better. "I am sorry, Gideon." The use of his Christian name was delicate, almost familial. He should have disliked it. Instead, he barely heard it. No one wanted this. After she left, he stood at the window until the street blurred. Then he sent for Cressida. She came within 10 minutes, which angered him more than delay would have done. She entered the study in a walking gown of deep violet, her bonnet ribbons untied, as if she had been preparing to go out. When she saw the papers on his desk, her hands became still at her sides. Only that. No gasp, no theatrical alarm. You closed the door. She did. The latch sounded small and final. Gideon turned one page toward her. Is this your hand? Cressida did not approach immediately. Her gaze moved from his face to the letter, then to the copied account, then to the silver inkstand near his hand. Something changed in her eyes when she saw the ink. Not guilt, recognition. He mistook it because he was already prepared to. Answer me. She stepped closer and looked down. It resembles my hand. That was not my question. Then ask a better one. His anger rose, because beneath it something else had begun to move. Fear. Did you write to Lord Osric, Fenwick? No. Did you copy estate accounts? No. Did you give him private information concerning Westmere or this house? No. Each answer was calm. Too calm. Gideon heard denial and found no comfort in it. You expect me to accept that? Cressida lifted her eyes. I expected you to ask before deciding. That was clearly optimistic. He pushed the account toward her. This is your script. It is near my script. Near enough. Near enough for what? For gossip? For convenience? For a husband who has always preferred distance because closeness might require trust. Do not make this sentimental. She seemed to absorb the words physically. Not like a blow. Like a door closing inside her. I see. Do you? He came around the desk holding one letter. You were seen with Fenwick. A note fell near your chair. Lady Portia herself was concerned by the impropriety of the scene. Lady Portia arranged the scene. That is an accusation. So is this. Silence. He hated that she was right. He hated more that rightness did not clear her. You should have picked up the note, he said. Then it would have been mine. You should have told me at once. You were in the room. You didn't ask what had happened. You asked whether he had entertained me. The memory returned with humiliating precision. His own voice, her face closing. Portia's soft presence near them. He forced it aside. If you were innocent, you should have insisted on being heard. Cressida looked at him for a long moment. Do you know how many times a woman can offer the truth before the offering itself becomes shameful? He did not answer. She looked back at the documents. Her gaze halted at the lower edge of the letter. There, a faint blue-black darkness had gathered in a stroke too heavy for ordinary ink. This ink came from your study. Gideon's eyes sharpened. How would you know? Because your ink is mixed darker than most. You once complained that ordinary ink faded too brown in estate ledgers. That proves access. Yes, she said. It does. He heard the implication and rejected it, because accepting it required a humility he did not yet possess. You had access. So did your clerks, your steward, your servants, your guests. When they were left waiting, and anyone charming enough to be trusted for 5 minutes in a room full of unlocked paper. Careful, her mouth curved, not in amusement. I have been careful for 2 years. Look where it has brought me. He turned away before her steadiness could unsettle him further. I will cancel our appearance at the opera tonight. Her face paled, though her voice did not. That will be understood as condemnation. It will prevent a spectacle. No. It will create one in my absence. Better absence than disgrace. There it was. The word neither of them had spoken. Disgrace. It stood between them, wearing her name. Cressida looked at the letters once more, then at the inkstand. Her fingers moved, as if she meant to touch the page, but she stopped before doing so. You have already believed them. Gideon said nothing. That was his answer. She nodded once. The motion was small, almost formal. Then there is very little left for me to defend. Cressida. Her name escaped with less coldness than he intended. She paused at the door. Do you know my character so little? The question was quiet enough to be mercy. It should have saved him. Instead, he gave her silence. Her face changed then, not dramatically. No tears came. No accusation followed. She simply withdrew the last unguarded part of herself from the room. When she left, Gideon remained among the letters, the copied account, and the ink that seemed suddenly too dark. That evening, the Duke of Alder-mere appeared at the opera alone. By midnight, every drawing room in London knew her grace had not been beside him. By morning, the silence he had chosen for protection had become a verdict. Cressida did not go upstairs as a woman escaping a house. She went as a duchess completing her last duty within it. The breakfast room door had closed behind her, and for a moment the hall of Alder-mere house stretched before her with its polished floors, gilt, framed mirrors, and silent footmen, pretending not to have heard the end of a marriage. She did not hurry. Hurrying invited pity, and pity had always been London's favourite way of insulting a woman while keeping its gloves clean. Mrs. Hadley stood near the staircase, pale with concern, and too well trained to show more than a slight tightening around the mouth. "Your Grace," she said, "shall I send for your maid?" "Yes." "Ask Barnes to come to my dressing room. Have the smaller trunks brought down within the hour." Mrs. Hadley's gaze flickered toward the breakfast room. "Within the hour?" "Within the hour," Cressida repeated. Her voice did not break. That seemed to distress the housekeeper more than tears would have done. Cressida climbed the stairs with one hand on the banister, each step measured because her knees had begun to feel unreliable. Not weak, only human. There was a difference, and she clung to it. In her dressing room, the morning fire had burned low. The room smelled faintly of lavender water, pressed linen, and the beeswax polish Barnes used on the wardrobe doors. It was a pretty room, gentler than the rest of the house, but it had never become hers. Nothing truly did when one lived as a guest inside a title. Barnes entered quickly, her cap ribbons trembling. She had served Cressida since the wedding, and possessed the rare loyalty of a servant who could remain silent without becoming cold. "Your Grace," she whispered. Cressida removed her gloves. The bare finger where her ring had been seemed indecently exposed. "We are going to Bath." Barnes swallowed. For long enough, that was mercy. It spared them both the larger word. The maid crossed to the wardrobe. "Which gowns shall I pack?" "The grey travelling dress, the brown merino, the violet walking gown, and the blue silk, if it can be folded without crushing." "No jewels belonging to the house." Barnes paused. "Not the pearl parure. Especially not the pearl parure. His Grace gave it to you." Cressida looked toward the mirror. Her reflection stood straight, composed, and almost unfamiliar. "His Grace gave it to the Duchess of Alder-mere. I am uncertain how long society will permit me to remain her." Barnes pressed her lips together and turned back to the wardrobe. Fabric moved, drawers opened. The first trunk received gowns, linen, stockings, and a small case of personal letters tied with a faded ribbon. Cressida unlocked the lower drawer of her writing desk and removed her mother's shawl, soft with age and worn thin at the edges. Lady Marley had wrapped it around Cressida's shoulders the week before the wedding, and said with a courage that had not fooled either of them, that great houses were less frightening once one learned where the morning light fell. Cressida held the shawl for one breath too long, then placed it in the trunk herself. Beneath the shawl lay the folded blotting sheet she had taken from Gideon's study the night after the musical evening. She had not known why she kept it then. Instinct had moved before hope did. The paper bore the ghost of blue-black ink pressed backward into the fibers, and a partial sweep of a letter that resembled her C only to a careless eye. Gideon's ink. Not Gideon's hand, not hers. She slid it between two letters from Aunt Honoria and closed the leather folder. Barnes saw the motion but asked nothing. That was why Cressida trusted her. A soft knock sounded. Mrs. Hadley entered with a silver tray carrying a folded note. "From Mr. Bellamy's clerk, Your Grace. It was delivered below just now." Cressida took it. Her name was written in a brisk legal hand. The message was brief. The settlement proposed by His Grace allowed her a substantial annual income, a Bath residence if desired, and the retention of personal effects. In return, the solicitor recommended discretion regarding all matters touching upon Lord Osric Fenwick and the copied estate account until the Duke determined the least damaging course. Cressida read it twice, then she folded it neatly. "Mrs. Hadley, send word to the clerk that I shall consider the financial terms when they are no longer coupled to my silence." The housekeeper's eyes widened, then lowered. "Yes, Your Grace." Barnes shut the first trunk with more force than necessary. "Forgive me," she said at once. Cressida almost smiled, almost. "There is nothing to forgive." Footsteps sounded in the corridor beyond the half-open door. Firm, controlled, unmistakable. Barnes dropped into a curtsy as Gideon appeared at the threshold. He did not enter immediately. Perhaps even he understood that a dressing room was not a battlefield, unless a woman granted him the right to cross it. His gaze moved from the trunks to the open wardrobe, then to the shawl's corner visible beneath the leather straps. "Leave us," he said. Barnes looked to Cressida, not to him. The small act passed through the room like a candle being lit. Gideon noticed. Cressida did too. "You may wait in the corridor, Barnes," she said. When the maid had gone, Gideon stepped inside and closed the door, but not fully. A thin line of hallway light remained. Cressida appreciated the restraint more than she wished to. "The solicitor's clerk came quickly," she said. "I sent for him before breakfast." "Of course you did." His mouth tightened. "You make that sound dishonorable." "No. Only efficient." He glanced at the trunks again. "You cannot mean to leave within the hour." "I can, I do. This is unnecessary haste. You place legal papers beside my teacup." "Let us not pretend haste offends you." He took that without reply, which unsettled her more than argument would have done. The Gideon she knew answered wounds with ice. This man looked as if the ice had cracked somewhere below the surface, and he could hear water moving beneath it. "Bath is nearly 100 miles, he said. "The roads are wet. The wheels will still turn. You will take the enclosed carriage." "I will take the carriage that was ordered." "You will take the enclosed carriage," he repeated. "And an outrider." Cressida turned from the desk. "No, this is not a punishment, it is protection. Protection requires trust. What you are offering is surveillance with better horses." His eyes darkened. "Do not be reckless to make a point. I have been careful for 2 years, and was called guilty in my own husband's study. Recklessness could hardly do worse." He stepped closer, then stopped when she did not move back. "Cressida, I will not have you exposed to every curious stare between London and Bath. You exposed me last night when you attended the opera alone." Silence followed. It was clean and terrible. Gideon looked away first. She felt no triumph. She had wanted him to understand before understanding became an autopsy. "Lady Portia has already begun," he said at last. "I received word that she has spoken of your departure as an admission." Cressida absorbed the blow with the practiced stillness of a woman who had learned that public cruelty often arrived dressed as concern. Then, Lady Portia is impatient. "I knew she wished to be." "Why did you not say more?" Cressida stared at him. "I did say more. You preferred her concern to my character." His hand moved at his side, then closed. "I did not come here to argue." "Then why did you come?" The question stripped the room of ceremony. Gideon looked at her trunks, at the chair where she had once sat, while Barnes dressed her hair for dinners he barely attended, at the bare finger she no longer tried to hide. When he answered, his voice was lower. "I do not know." The truth of it reached her before she could defend against it. For a moment, the space between them filled with all the words that might have saved them if spoken months earlier. "Are you lonely? Did I wound you? What happened at Lady Portia's? Do you still hope for me?" None of them came. Gideon was not yet humble enough to ask them. Cressida was not foolish enough to offer them uninvited. She picked up her gloves. "Then I shall not keep you." He looked at her hand. "The settlement is generous because I will not see you uncomfortable. My comfort ceased to be your concern when my truth did. That is unjust." "No," she said softly. "It is late." His face changed at that, almost imperceptibly. It was the first time she had seen the word reach him. Late. Not impossible, not forgiven. Late. Barnes returned when Cressida called, and the trunks were carried down. Gideon followed at a distance that would have satisfied etiquette and no heart. In the hall, Mrs. Hadley waited with Cressida's cloak. A footman opened the front door. Damp air entered, smelling of rain, stone, and the city that would devour her name by luncheon. Cressida fastened her gloves. Gideon stood near the bottom step, rigid as a portrait. At least allow the outrider as far as Hounslow, he said. No, Cressida. She paused with one foot on the carriage step. Hearing her name still hurt. That was inconvenient. You may send him if you wish, she said. But if he follows, I shall stop at the first posting inn and send him back with a note everyone may read. His eyes held hers. For a breath, she thought he might forbid her departure. But the law could give a man many powers over a wife, and pride could make him think he possessed more. Gideon used neither. He stepped back. Cressida entered the carriage. Barnes climbed in after her. The door closed. Through the glass, Alder-mere House looked as it always had, beautiful, severe, and incapable of apology. Gideon stood on the pavement without hat or gloves, the morning damp touching his dark hair. As the carriage lurched forward, his hand lifted once, not quite farewell and not quite command. Cressida did not wave. She unfolded her mother's shawl across her lap, placed one hand over the hidden blotting sheet inside her folder, and let the wheels carry her west toward Bath. She did not know whether she was ruined or free, but for the first time since becoming Duchess of Alder-mere, the answer would not be decided by the man she left behind. Aunt Honoria Vale did not receive Cressida with tears, smelling salts, or the tragic softness society, reserved for women it had already buried. She received her at the door of a honey-coloured house, in Bath, with a walking stick in one hand, a shawl over her shoulders, and eyes so sharp they seemed capable of cutting ribbons from a bonnet at 10 paces. The journey from London had taken the better. Part of the day, the wheels grinding over wet roads, while Barnes sat opposite with folded hands, and Cressida kept her mother's shawl across her lap, as if warmth were a discipline rather than a comfort. By the time the carriage stopped in Laura Place, dusk had settled over the city, turning the pale stone terraces gold and grey. Cressida stepped down before the footman could fully offer his arm. She had spent too many hours inside that carriage, refusing to imagine Gideon at the breakfast table, refusing to wonder whether he had touched the ring, refusing most of all to hope that absence might teach him what presence had not. Aunt Honoria looked her over from bonnet to hem. You are thinner than when I saw you at Christmas. Good evening to you as well, Aunt. Good evening is for neighbours. Family may begin with the truth. Cressida's mouth trembled, but not with tears, with something dangerously close to relief. Honoria leaned forward and kissed her cheek. Come inside before Bath decides it has been invited to stare. The house was narrow, warm, and ordered without being severe. A fire burned in the drawing room. A tea tray waited. No portrait of a dead. Duke glowered from the walls. No footman watched to see whether a duchess would fracture. Barnes was sent below, with instructions for supper, and a proper bedchamber. Cressida removed her gloves and stood before the fire, feeling heat touch her chilled fingers. It should have undone her. Instead, she became more still. Honoria lowered herself into a chair and tapped her walking stick once against the carpet. Well, Cressida turned. Well, what? Are you ruined or merely released? The question struck with such clean force that Cressida almost laughed. The sound caught in her throat and became breath instead. Do not know. Then we shall find out. Sit down. I have just left my husband. Yes. I assumed as much from the trunks, the grey face, and the fact that your maid looked ready to bite anyone who said his name. Sit. Cressida sat. Her body obeyed before pride could object. Honoria poured tea with a hand that did not shake, though she was nearly 70, and had outlived one foolish husband, 2 brothers, and any patience for polite cruelty. Tell me the facts first, she said. You may bleed emotionally later if time permits. Aunt Cressida, if you wish to be pitied, you should have gone to your father. If you came to me, you came to think. That was exactly why she had come. Cressida folded her hands in her lap and told the story without ornament. Lady Portia's musical evening. Lord Osric's dropped note, Gideon's arrival, the letters, the copied estate account, the opera, the solicitor's packet, the signature. She did not describe the sound of the ring touching the table. She did not need to. Honoria heard the absence and narrowed her eyes. Show me what you brought. Cressida opened the leather folder she had carried from London. Inside were her personal letters, the note from the solicitor's clerk, and the blotting sheet folded between 2 pages. She placed the blotting sheet on the tea table. Honoria drew a lamp closer. The ghost of blue-black ink lay backward across the paper, faint but visible. One sweep resembled the beginning of Cressida's initial. Another mark was heavier, pressed by an impatient hand. This is from Alder-mere House, from Gideon's study. I took it the night after Lady Portia's gathering, before he accused you, before he believed the accusation aloud. Honoria looked at her sharply, but did not soften. Good. That distinction matters. She studied the sheet again. This ink is distinctive. Gideon has it mixed for estate accounts. He dislikes brown fading. And who knew that? Anyone who used his study, his secretary, the steward, servants, guests left waiting there. Lady Portia, Cressida hesitated. Once. Perhaps more than once. I remember she borrowed a pen during a charity subscription. The book was green leather. She asked me to sign first. Honoria's mouth compressed. Portia Selwyn and a subscription book. You know something. I know a great many things. Age is useful when people mistake it for irrelevance. Aunt. Honoria sat back. Years ago, before you married, there was a quiet scandal over a forged note connected to Lady Portia's cousin. Nothing proved. Nothing public enough to kill invitations. But the hand in that affair was said to have been copied from a charity list. Portia was near that list as well. The room seemed to tighten. Cressida felt the first true movement of anger since leaving London. It rose steady and clean, not hot enough to consume judgment. Then this was not improvisation. No. Polite women rarely improvise ruin. They embroider it. Honoria took a sheet of paper from the small writing desks beside her. We begin with a timeline, not feelings, facts. Who had access to the handwriting sample? Who had access to the ink? Who benefits if you are removed from Alder-mere? Cressida looked into the fire. Gideon had asked her for denial. Honoria asked her for strategy. The difference nearly broke her composure. Lady Portia benefits, she said. She is widowed, admired, and less secure than she appears. She has always placed herself near Gideon when society allowed it. Money? I do not know, then find out. Honoria dipped her pen. Lord Osric, a younger son, charming, expensive tastes. No visible discipline. Depth, then. Men like that do not need motive. They need rescue. She wrote his name. And Gideon? The name entered the room without title. Cressida looked at her aunt. He benefits from believing the worst, because the worst confirms what he already fears. Honoria's expression changed then. Not pity. Recognition. Ah. His father's scandal wounded him. He sees betrayal before he sees pain. That explains him. It does not excuse him. Cressida closed her eyes for one moment. I know, do you? I signed the papers. Signing is not the same as knowing. Some women leave a house and keep living in the room where they were wounded. Cressida opened her eyes. The fire snapped softly. Outside, Bath carriage wheels passed over stone. Inside, for the first time in 2 years, no one expected her to arrange herself around Gideon's silence. Honoria pushed the paper toward her. Write it. What? The sentence you need to believe before society tells you what happened. Cressida took the pen. Her hand hovered, then moved. I was not discarded, I left. The words looked stark and almost improper on the page. Honoria read them and nodded. Good. Now we may begin. The first gossip sheet arrived the next morning, wrapped around a note from an acquaintance who claimed concern, and delivered cruelty with perfect penmanship. Barnes brought it up with breakfast, her face thunderous enough to alarm the toast. Cressida unfolded the page beside Honoria's teapot. The item did not name her directly. It did not need to. A certain great lady, lately absent from her husband's box at the opera, had reportedly departed London after private letters placed her discretion in question. A noble house of ancient standing had chosen silence, which every reader understood as confirmation. Cressida read it once. Then she placed it on the table. Her fingers were cold, but they did not shake. London works quickly. Honoria buttered a piece of toast. London has few talents, but speed in malice is one of them. Barnes burst out. It's wicked, Your Grace. They don't know anything. Cressida looked at her maid. No. But they know what they wish to enjoy. A knock sounded below, followed by the murmur of a servant. Minutes later, a card was brought in on a tray, Mr. Bellamy's junior clerk had come from London with revised settlement language and instructions from the Duke of Alder-mere. Honoria's brows rose. He sends solicitors faster than apologies. Cressida turned the card over in her hand. Show him into the front parlour. The clerk was young, earnest, and terrified of both the Duchess and her aunt. He bowed too often and opened his leather case with trembling fingers. Gideon had increased the proposed allowance. He had offered to lease a Bath residence in her own name, with servants paid from his private funds. He had also requested that she refrain from any correspondence or public statement concerning Lord Osric Fenwick until he could determine the least damaging course for the house. Cressida listened until the clerk finished. Then she asked, who handled the copied estate account before His Grace received it? The clerk blinked. Your Grace, chain of custody, Mr. Allen. Who gave it to whom? I believe Lord Osric Fenwick delivered certain papers to His Grace at White's. Before or after Lady Portia Selwyn saw them? I cannot say. Find out. He looked horrified. Your Grace, I am not certain Mr. Bellamy would consider that within my authority. Honoria leaned on her stick. Young man, you are in a room with two women whose patience has been professionally underestimated. Adjust your authority. The clerk swallowed. Yes, Lady Vale. Cressida folded the settlement paper and returned it. Tell Mr. Bellamy, I shall consider financial terms when they are no longer coupled to silence. Tell His Grace that if he wishes the least damaging course, he might begin by discovering who damaged the truth. Yes, Your Grace. At the door, the clerk paused. There was one thing. His Grace asked me to deliver a note, only if you refused the terms. Cressida's breath altered before she could prevent it. She held out her hand. The note was sealed with Alder-mere black wax. Gideon's writing on the outside was severe and familiar. She waited until the clerk left before opening it. Inside was one line. Tell me what I failed to see. Honoria watched her face. Well, Cressida folded the note carefully, not because she forgave him, but because the words were the first he had written without command. He is late, she said. Yes, Honoria replied. But late men can still be useful if they learn to follow directions. Cressida placed Gideon's note beside the timeline, not above it. Then she picked up her pen and wrote Portia Selwyn's name at the center of a fresh page. For the first time since the breakfast room, she was not moving away from ruin. She was moving toward the truth. By the time Mr. Allen returned from Bath, Gideon had already discovered that a house could obey a man and still refuse to comfort him. Alder-mere House ran as it always had. Fires were laid, letters were sorted. Servants appeared before bells had fully ceased ringing. The silver was polished, the carpets brushed, and the morning papers pressed flat beside his coffee. Nothing failed except the illusion that order meant peace. Gideon sat in his study with Cressida's wedding ring locked inside his desk, and the cracked silver inkstand placed in front of him like an accusation, too patient to be dismissed. The junior clerk stood near the door, hat in hand, visibly wishing he had chosen any profession that did not require carrying messages between wounded aristocrats. Her Grace declined to accept the revised settlement as presented, Allen said. She said she would consider financial terms when they were no longer coupled to silence. Gideon looked up slowly. Those were her words. Yes, Your Grace, all of them. Allen swallowed. She also said that if Your Grace wishes the least damaging course, you might begin by discovering who damaged the truth. The room went quiet. Gideon did not move, but something inside him shifted with the ugly precision of a key turning in a lock. Not because the message was gentle. It was not. It was because it sounded like Cressida. Not the forged hand, not the convenient guilt placed before him. Her, clear, restrained, and more interested in truth than comfort. Leave the documents, Gideon said, and send for Mrs. Hadley, Wilkes, and Mr. Hargreaves. Allen blinked. Now, Your Grace. Now. 10 minutes later, The Mayfair housekeeper, the butler, and the steward of Westmere Hall stood in the study as if summoned before judgment. Gideon remained behind his desk, but the papers before him were no longer the separation packet. They were household logs, calling cards, guest entries, and old account copies pulled from cabinets that Cressida had kept in exact order. That was the first wound of the morning. He had not known where half of them were. The servants had, she had taught them. "I want every instance in which Lady Portia Selwyn waited in this study," he said. "Mrs. Hadley's face changed by one careful degree. Wilkes, the butler, looked toward her, and then back at the Duke. Hargreaves frowned as if the question offended him on behalf of all male administration. "Lady Portia is a frequent caller," Mrs. Hadley said. "Not frequent enough to be vague." "There was the Charity Committee morning last November," Wilkes said. "Her ladyship arrived before her grace came downstairs. She was shown here because the small drawing-room chimney was smoking." "How long?" Gideon asked. "Perhaps 10 minutes." Gideon's gaze went to the inkstand. "Was she alone?" "For part of it, your grace. I believed there was no harm. Her ladyship had been received here before." "By whom?" Wilkes hesitated. "By her grace, when charity papers required signatures. By your secretary once. By yourself twice, I believe." The answer was proper. It was also disastrous. Gideon turned to Hargreaves. "You brought copied estate accounts to London in November." "I brought summaries, your grace." "Her grace requested duplicates for household comparison." "Did she?" "Yes." Hargreaves's tone suggested that a duchess requesting estate accounts remained a personal insult months later. "She was most particular. Accuracy is not a grievance, Mr. Hargreaves." The steward flushed. Gideon leaned back. "Were any account copies left in this study while Lady Portia waited here?" "I cannot say." "Then begin saying what you can." Hargreaves looked at the documents, then at Wilkes, then at the floor. "Some papers may have been laid on the side table. I was called to speak with the clerk. Only for a few minutes." Gideon felt the first clean line of fact cut through rumor. A room, a guest, an unattended account, the inkstand, a handwriting sample taken from a charity subscription book. Not proof yet, but shape. "And the inkstand?" Gideon asked. Mrs. Hadley clasped her hands. "It was not cracked when it came from Westmere, your grace." He looked at her. "You are certain?" Her grace noticed silver. She always noticed what required repair before it became wasteful. She would have sent it to be mended. That struck more deeply than accusation. Cressida would have noticed. He had not. Wilkes cleared his throat. "There was also a maid in Lady Portia's service. Elsie Tarrant. She came once with her ladyship, carrying a dispatch case. A week later, I heard she had been dismissed. For what reason? Ink stains on a cup, according to Lady Portia's second footman. They made sport of it below stairs." Gideon's hand closed slowly. "Find where she is," Wilkes bowed. "Yes, your grace." Quietly, "Yes, your grace." Hargreaves shifted. "Your grace, if I may, this inquiry may cast unpleasant reflection upon persons of standing." Gideon looked at him until the steward's words died. "A person of standing cast unpleasant reflection upon my wife. We are past delicacy." No one spoke. For the first time since Cressida left, the silence in the study served him. It held still while he worked. He dismissed them with instructions for guest lists, servant references, and every letter Cressida had written concerning estate matters. By afternoon, his desk was covered in her hand. Real letters, practical letters, notes about roof repairs, widows' rents, candle accounts, leases, linen, medicines, and one precise correction to Hargreaves's arithmetic that would have amused him if shame had left room for amusement. He read until the winter light thinned. Cressida's true writing did not flatter. It clarified. It moved with disciplined grace, but each line carried purpose. Even in household notes, she never wasted a word. The forged letters lying beside them seemed suddenly vulgar. They had copied the slant and missed the soul. Gideon sat back with one of her old notes in hand. "Mrs. Dern's cottage must be repaired before rain enters the roof beams. Delay will cost the estate more than mercy." He remembered her standing in his study with that petition. He remembered thinking her inconvenient. He had not recognized courage because it had arrived in a brown morning gown and asked him to do his duty. A knock came. Wilkes entered with a small salver. "A note from Lady Portia Selwyn, Your Grace." Gideon took it without opening it. "Read the outside." Wilkes obeyed. "Her ladyship requests the honor of your presence at a reception tomorrow afternoon, where mutual friends may be reassured after unfortunate rumors." The trap was almost elegant. Almost. Gideon broke the seal. The note was all softness, concern for his dignity, sympathy for his difficult position. Hope that society might be guided gently away from ugliness, provided the Duchess did not force more public discussion. Beneath the perfume and polish lay the same demand as Bellamy's settlement. Silence. "Send no reply," Gideon said. Wilkes inclined his head. "Very good, Your Grace." And Wilkes, "Yes, Your Grace. No member of this household is to speak of her grace with disrespect. Not in the hall, not below stairs, not to callers, not to family servants from other houses. If anyone forgets, they may find another place before nightfall." Something in the old butler's face eased. "I shall make it understood." When he was alone again, Gideon opened the drawer where he had locked Cressida's ring. He did not touch it. He only looked at it, then closed the drawer with care. Apology was too small a word for what he owed. Defense, too, seemed inadequate now. A man defended property. He defended pride. He defended borders. What Cressida required was not a wall thrown around her after the arrows had landed. She required truth dragged into the light by the man who had helped bury it. Gideon took a fresh sheet of paper. He dipped his pen into the cracked inkstand, then stopped. The sight of the dark liquid against silver turned his stomach. He set that pen aside and chose another from the drawer. The first letter he had sent to Bath had been a question. "Tell me what I failed to see." This one could not ask her to heal him by instructing him. It had to offer something smaller and harder. He wrote slowly. "I believed what was easy because trust was difficult. I am beginning to understand that the failure was mine before it became public. I do not ask you to forgive me. I ask only that you allow me to learn the truth without standing in your way." He read the lines and knew they were insufficient. Still, for once, he did not improve them into something more commanding. He sealed the letter himself. As the wax cooled, his eye caught a folded sheet wedged behind the lower drawer of the desk, partly hidden beneath an old estate map. He drew it out, blotting paper. Blue-black ink. A reversed curve, like the beginning of Cressida's initial, pressed too heavily by a hand that did not know where her grace ended and imitation began. Gideon stood so abruptly that the chair struck the carpet behind him. The study, the inkstand, the charity book, Lady Portia's waiting smile, Osric's careful distress, all aligned in a pattern ugly enough to be true. He had wanted certainty when certainty condemned his wife. Now certainty had turned, and it was looking back at him. By the next afternoon, Lady Portia Selwyn's reception had become the most carefully attended accident in London. No invitation had mentioned scandal, yet every carriage outside her Grosvenor Square house seemed to have arrived for no other nourishment. The drawing-room glittered with pale gowns, dark coats, polished shoes, silver trays, and faces trained to express concern while waiting for disgrace to enter by the door. Portia moved among her guests with a widow's measured grace, dressed in dove-grey silk rather than black, as if sorrow had refined itself into influence. She had arranged the room with a hostess's eye and a strategist's soul. The older ladies occupied the chairs nearest the hearth, where their whispers could be mistaken for wisdom. Younger women stood near the pianoforte, eager and frightened of appearing eager. Men gathered beneath the portraits, speaking of Parliament, horses, and weather, while looking toward every opening door. Lord Osric Fenwick leaned beside a marble-topped table with a folded pamphlet half concealed beneath his hand. He looked pale around the mouth, though his smile remained bright. Debt had taught him charm. Fear had not yet taught him silence. "You are certain this is wise?" he murmured when Portia paused beside him. "Wisdom is rarely required when timing will do," she replied. "You need only remember what you were given." The Duke is not a man one toys with. Portia's smile warmed for the benefit of a passing countess, then cooled again. The Duke is a man who has already chosen what to believe. We are merely helping society arrive there after him. Osric touched the pamphlet. And if the Duchess denies it, she will deny it beautifully. That is why people will enjoy watching. Across the room, Lady Caverley accepted a copy of the gossip sheet from a footman who pretended not to know what he was distributing. The item was brief and poisonous. It spoke of private correspondence, a noble house injured by feminine indiscretion, and a younger gentleman whose discretion had become a burden. No names were printed, none were needed. One lady read, looked up, and immediately passed it to another. The paper moved like a small flame. Portia allowed it to travel. She had not expected Cressida to appear. A guilty woman, or a woman successfully painted as guilty, usually did society the favor of hiding. That was the first pleasure of ruin. It required no formal verdict. Absence did the work. Then the butler announced, with a voice that reached every corner, Her Grace, the Duchess of Alder-mere. Lady Vale. The room fell into a silence so complete that the turning of one pamphlet page sounded like a confession. Cressida stood at the threshold with Aunt Honoria Vale beside her, and she did not look like a woman dragged back by shame. She wore a dark blue walking gown, plain enough for dignity and fine enough to remind every person present that she was still a duchess. Her face was composed. Not blank, not fragile, composed. Honoria, in plum-colored silk and with her ivory-handled walking stick, looked around the room as if taking inventory of fools. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Portia came forward with both hands extended, playing welcome before the audience could notice she had expected absence. "Dear Cressida," she said. "How brave of you to come." Cressida gave the smallest curtsy allowed by courtesy and rank. "Lady Portia, your rooms appeared to be discussing me. I thought I should relieve them of the inconvenience of imagination." A ripple passed through the guests. Honoria's mouth twitched. Portia's hands lowered. "Surely you mistake concern for discussion." "No," Cressida said. "I have had much practice distinguishing the two." Lord Osric shifted near the marble table. Cressida looked toward him. She did not hurry the glance. She let the room follow it. "Lord Osric," she said. "You seem to be guarding something." He lifted the pamphlet with a brittle laugh. "Only the usual nonsense. London prints too much and understands too little. Then perhaps you will correct it." His eyes flicked to Portia. That was enough. Not proof, but enough to show the thread between puppeteer and hand. Cressida crossed the room. Each step felt measured not by distance, but by the number of people who had once found her useful because she was quiet. She stopped several feet from Osric, leaving him no excuse to lean close, no chance to perform intimacy. "You have allowed my name to travel through this room without speaking it," she said. "I would prefer honesty even from a coward." A lady gasped. Osric's smile faded. "Your Grace, I would never willingly offend you. Then don't do it unwillingly. Say plainly what you have implied." Portia moved in. "Cressida, this is hardly the place." Honoria tapped her stick once against the floor. "It became the place when your footman began handing out literature." A few older women looked down at the pamphlets in their laps, as though the paper had appeared there by sorcery. Osric cleared his throat. "No one wishes to accuse you publicly. How kind." "Do it clearly, then." The words struck harder because she did not raise her voice. Osric looked toward the door, perhaps hoping escape might arrive dressed as etiquette. Instead, another announcement came. "His Grace, the Duke of Alder-mere." Gideon entered, and the room changed again. Power did that. It rearranged spines. He wore black, as he had at the opera, but there was no cold theatre in him now. His gaze found Cressida, then Osric, then the pamphlets. A muscle tightened in his jaw. He started toward his wife with the stride of a man prepared to put himself between her and every whisper in England. Cressida lifted one gloved hand. Not high, only enough. "Stop." Gideon stopped. The act was so small that half the room may not have understood its meaning. The other half understood too well. A duke had obeyed his wife before witnesses. Cressida did not thank him. Not yet. She turned back to Osric. You were saying? Osric's face had gone damp with nerves. There was correspondence. Between whom? Between yourself and me. You received letters signed by me? Marked by you. Marked is not signed. In your hand, then. You are certain of my hand? He hesitated. Certain enough. That is not certainty. That is appetite wearing spectacles. A few mouths tightened against laughter. Portia's eyes flashed. Gideon remained where Cressida had stopped him, his hands at his sides, his expression dark with restraint. Cressida continued, What did these letters contain? Expressions of confidence. How vague. References to private matters. Vaguer still. Estate matters, Osric said at last. Information concerning Westmere. Name one tenant. He blinked. I beg your pardon. You said estate matters. Name one tenant whose information I supposedly entrusted to you. The account was financial. It did not require memorization. Then name one sum. His mouth opened. Nothing emerged. Cressida waited. The waiting became merciless because it was polite. Name one lease. Your Grace, I am not a steward. No. You are a younger son with expensive habits and a remarkable willingness to handle papers you do not understand. The room stirred. Someone whispered Osric's name. Someone else whispered debt. Portia stepped forward, still smiling, though the expression now had strain beneath it. This is distressing for everyone. Lord Osric was trying to be discreet. Lord Osric was trying to be useful, Cressida said. The question is, to whom? Portia's color rose. Before she could answer, Gideon spoke, his voice low enough to remain controlled and clear enough to silence every corner. Lord Osric, you will answer, Her Grace. Osric swallowed. Your Grace, I was given reason to believe the letters were genuine. Gideon's eyes narrowed. Given by whom? I mean only that the circumstances were convincing. Cressida looked at Gideon then. Not in appeal, in warning. Do not take this from me, he understood. The realization moved through his face like pain. He inclined his head once and fell silent. Cressida turned back to Osric. You dropped a note near my chair at Lady Portia's musical evening. You wanted me to pick it up. I dropped nothing intentionally. Then you are clumsy as well as imprecise. Honoria coughed into her glove. It might have been a laugh. Lady Caverley leaned forward, suddenly less hungry for Cressida's disgrace than curious about Osric's discomfort. That was how society turned, not morally, socially. The wind changed and everyone adjusted their sails. Osric reached for the folded paper beneath his hand. There is an account, he said, copied from Westmere documents. Portia did not stop him. She wanted the stronger weapon used before the room moved beyond her control. Osric unfolded it. It bears a hand recognized as yours. Cressida saw the page from several feet away. The lines were neat. The slant was close. The lower signature struck her harder than she wished to show. A false version of herself stared back in ink. Gideon took one step before stopping himself. Cressida felt it without looking at him. She let the silence stretch. Then she said, Bring it here. Osric did. Not willingly, but he did. She did not touch the paper. She bent slightly and looked. The old blue-black ink caught the light. The final curve of Marley was wrong. Too heavy, too eager. Whoever had copied her hand had learned the shape and missed the restraint. Cressida straightened. You claim this is mine. It appears so. No, Lord Osric. You have spent several days permitting rooms to believe I betrayed my husband's house. You may do better than appears. He looked trapped now. It is your signature. Portia's voice entered, smooth and cool. Then explain the signature, Your Grace. The room turned toward Cressida as one body. Gideon did not move. Aunt Honoria's hand tightened on her stick. Cressida looked at the false name on the paper, then lifted her eyes to the woman who had finally stepped from shadow into aim. Gladly, she said. Gladly, Cressida said, and the word moved through Lady Portia's drawing room with such calm force that several guests leaned forward before they could pretend indifference. Lord Osric Fenwick held the copied estate account as if it had become warmer in his fingers. Lady Portia stood beside the pianoforte, one hand resting lightly upon its polished edge. her face arranged into sympathetic concern. Gideon remained several feet behind Cressida, exactly where she had stopped him. His stillness cost him. She knew it without turning. She could feel the restrained violence of his wish to step forward, to seize the paper, to silence the room by ducal command. But command had already failed her. This required truth. First, Cressida said, place the page on the table. Osric gave a small laugh. Surely that's unnecessary. Then keep holding it and let everyone see your hand shake. A rustle moved through the room. Osric looked down. His fingers were indeed unsteady. He placed the page on the marble-topped table. Cressida did not touch it. She leaned just enough to examine the false signature. You claim this is mine because it resembles my script. It does. A little too eagerly, perhaps, but resemblance is the entire point of forgery. Portia's brows lifted. Foras is a grave word, dear Cressida. One shouldn't use it merely because a document is inconvenient. Cressida turned her head. No. One should use it when a person has copied another woman's hand and sent it into rooms full of cowards. The silence sharpened. Lady Caverley's fan froze halfway open. Osric went pale. Portia's smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. If you are making an accusation, Portia said, it would be better to make it plainly. I intend to. Cressida looked back at the page. The final stroke of Marley is wrong. A countess near the hearth blinked. The final stroke? Cressida nodded. Before I married, I was Lady Cressida Marley. I signed that name thousands of times before I became Duchess of Alder-mere. My final stroke turns lightly upward. This one presses downward. Whoever wrote this had studied the shape, but not the habit. Osric recovered enough to scoff. That seems a delicate distinction on which to hang innocence. Men have hanged women's reputations on less. Gideon's hand flexed at his side. The line struck him. It was not directed only at Osric. Cressida knew it, and so did he. Portia moved a step closer. Handwriting varies. Fatigue, haste, emotion. Any lady knows that. Any lady who writes her own letters knows. More emotion may alter pressure. It doesn't alter instinct. You speak very confidently. I was required to learn confidence when people preferred my silence. Honoria Vale tapped her stick once. And the Duchess is correct. Every gaze turned toward her. Honoria did not appear flattered by the attention. She looked irritated that so many people needed educating. I saw Cressida's hand when she was 12, 17, and 24. She has always lifted the final stroke of Marley. That signature imitates her, but it doesn't know her. Family loyalty is touching, Portia said. It isn't evidence, nor is gossip printed before luncheon, Honoria replied. Gideon stepped forward then, not to stand before Cressida, but beside the table. He looked down at the signature. He had seen it earlier, but not like this, not with the room waiting. Not with Cressida standing only a few feet away, wounded and unbent. He saw the wrongness now. The line was too heavy. The letters were too decorative. The hand had tried to perform elegance and missed restraint. Shame rose in him so quickly that for a moment he could not speak. He should have seen it. He should have seen her. Your Grace? Portia asked softly. Surely you recognize your wife's hand. Gideon looked at her. I recognize an imitation of it. The room changed, not loudly. Society rarely turned with honesty. It turned with calculation. Ladies who had held pamphlets as though they were evidence now lowered them, as though they might stain gloves. Men who had avoided meeting Cressida's eyes now studied the floor, the ceiling, their cuffs, anywhere but her face. Osric's mouth opened. Your Grace, I only brought forward what was given to me. Gideon's stare settled on him. By whom? I mean, what came into my possession? That isn't what I asked. Osric's throat moved. Portia intervened before he could crumble. This is becoming unseemly. The Duke is distressed. Her Grace is distressed. Surely we may all agree that private matters should be settled privately. Cressida gave her a small, terrible smile. How convenient that privacy becomes virtuous only after public damage is done. You came here willingly. Because you made sure my absence would be treated as confession. Portia's eyes cooled. I invited concerned friends. You armed them with pamphlets. A low murmur passed through the room. Lady Caverley folded hers quickly and tucked it behind her reticule. Cressida turned to Osric again. Where did you obtain the handwriting sample? I didn't obtain anything. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. She pointed, not at him, but at the page. This was not copied from a private letter. My private hand is less formal. This was copied from a public signature, a subscription list, perhaps. A charity book. Somewhere my full name would have been written carefully enough for display. Honoria's voice entered, dry and precise. A green leather subscription book, I should think. Portia went still. Very still. It was the first honest thing her body had done all afternoon. Cressida saw it. Gideon saw it, so did half the room. Portia said, your imagination remains vigorous. At my age, imagination is unnecessary. Memory does the work. Honoria turned slightly toward the older ladies by the hearth. Some years ago, there was an unpleasant matter involving a note copied from a charity list connected to Lady Portia's cousin. It never became formal scandal because the family paid handsomely for quiet. I remember because I dislike waste, and they wasted a great deal of money protecting a fool. Portia's color rose. You go too far. Not yet, Honoria said. I'm pacing myself. A nervous laugh escaped someone near the window and was quickly swallowed. Cressida did not smile. The mention of the old scandal gave weight to what she had only suspected, but it also made danger clearer. Portia was not careless. A woman who had survived one buried accusation would not surrender to another without striking back. Lord Osric, Cressida said, did Lady Portia show you the green subscription book? No, the answer came too quickly. Gideon noticed. Did she promise to assist with your debts? Osric's eyes flashed toward him. My finances are not at issue. They are if they purchased my wife's ruin. Portia's voice hardened beneath its silk. Gideon, you should be careful. Sympathy can make men foolish, especially when guilt arrives late. The room inhaled. The use of his Christian name was an intimacy offered as a claim. Gideon did not look at her. You will address me properly in my wife's presence. Portia's face tightened. Cressida felt the words enter her guarded heart and did not let them soften her. Not yet. Gideon had defended her title. He had not yet repaired the wound beneath it. Osric reached for the account. Perhaps it would be best if I withdrew this until calmer minds can examine it. Gideon placed one gloved hand flat on the paper. No, Osric froze. Your Grace, the document remains here. My solicitor will take custody of it, along with the pamphlet and any letters you claim to possess. That seems excessive. So was slandering a duchess. A murmur of approval came from somewhere. Unexpected. An older gentleman near the mantel gave a firm nod. Society loved rank, and when rank changed direction, many consciences found courage at once. Portia saw it happening. She moved to recover the room. No one has slandered her Grace. We have only sought clarity. Cressida looked at her. Then let us have clarity. Who had access to the subscription book? Many people. It was a charity event. Who retained it afterward? My secretary, perhaps. A footman? I can't recall. How unfortunate. You recalled my loneliness very clearly. The strike landed. Portia's mouth compressed. Gideon looked at Cressida then, and the expression in his eyes nearly broke the discipline that had carried her through the room. It was not pity. It was worse. Recognition. He was beginning to see the length of what she had endured, and the sight of his seeing came too late to be comfort. When the guests began speaking again, the sound was different, less hungry, more uncertain. Portia had not fallen, but she had lost the room's easy trust. Osric had not confessed, but his charm had cracked. Cressida had not been fully vindicated, but she was no longer alone beneath accusation. Gideon leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I should have known your hand. She did not look at him at once. If she did, she feared the wound would answer before the woman did. At last, she turned. His face was pale beneath its control. You should have known my soul, she said. The words struck him harder than any public rebuke could have done. He stepped back, not in retreat, but in acceptance of the blow. At that moment, a footman entered with a small tray, and a note addressed not to the hostess, but to Cressida. Portia's eyes narrowed. Cressida took it. The paper was cheap, the writing hurried. She opened it with careful fingers. I know who broke the inkstand. Find Elsie Tarrant before Lady Portia does. Cressida folded the note once. Her pulse changed. Gideon saw it. What is it? He asked. She slipped the note into her glove and faced Lady Portia, who was watching too closely. Only a reminder, Cressida said. Some cracks are more useful than they appear. Then she turned toward the door, leaving the room with her name still intact, and the first real witness waiting somewhere in London. Elsie Tarrant was found not by a duke's command, but by a laundress who owed Barnes a kindness from 3 winters before. By late afternoon, the note that had reached Cressida in Lady Portia's drawing room had passed through Aunt Honoria's sharper judgment, Gideon's silent fury, and Barnes's practical network of women who knew London from below stairs, where truth often travelled faster than carriages. The message led them to a modest tea-room off a quieter street near Bloomsbury, respectable enough for ladies in daylight, and plain enough that few fashionable eyes would bother to look inside. Cressida arrived with Aunt Honoria at her side, and Gideon several paces behind, not because distance had been required by etiquette, but because she had asked it of him in the carriage. Don't come in like a duke looking for someone to punish, she had said. Come in like a man who wants the truth. He had received the instruction without protest, which unsettled her more than refusal would have done. Now, he stood near the door of the private alcove, while Cressida sat at a small round table set with 3 cups, a pot of tea, and a plate of untouched seed cake. Aunt Honoria occupied the chair closest to the curtain, her walking stick angled like a weapon no one could politely name. Across from Cressida sat Elsie Tarrant, a thin young woman of perhaps 22, with brown hair tucked under a simple bonnet and hands roughened by work. Her cuffs were clean now, almost aggressively so. She kept looking at Gideon, as if expecting rank to become a trap. Cressida poured tea and pushed a cup toward her. You are safe here for the length of this conversation, she said. After that, we shall make sure you remain safe somewhere else. Elsie's lips parted. Your Grace, I don't want trouble. No one ever wants trouble, Honoria said. That is why wicked people keep using it. Elsie looked down into the tea. Lady Portia said if I spoke, she'd tell every house in London I stole from her. Gideon's voice came from near the door, low and controlled. Did you? Elsie flinched. Cressida turned her head. Gideon went still, then corrected himself. Forgive me, that was poorly asked. He looked back at Elsie. Were you dismissed under that accusation? The girl's shoulders eased by less than an inch. Yes, Your Grace, but I didn't steal, I swear it. Then we begin there, Cressida said. Tell us what happened. Elsie wrapped both hands around the cup without drinking. Lady Portia had me copy names first. Just names from invitations, subscriptions, little notes. She said, my hand was neat, and I might be useful as a secretary if I improved. I was proud of it. I thought she meant to help me. Her cheeks colored with shame. Then she gave me pages with her Grace's signature, a green book, charity subscriptions. She told me to practice the shape of the letters. Honoria's eyes narrowed. The green book. Yes, my lady. Green leather, gold corners. Her Grace's name was near the top of one page. Lady Portia said, a duchess's hand had elegance, and a maid might better herself by learning elegance. Cressida felt the old insult move through her, cold and precise. Even her handwriting had been treated as property to be copied, used, and turned against her. She kept her voice gentle. When did estate accounts become part of it? Elsie glanced at Gideon again. He remained quiet this time. After a morning at Alder-mere House, her ladyship was shown into the Duke's study. I carried her dispatch case. The butler left us, only for a few minutes. She told me to stand by the door, but I saw papers on the side table. She looked through them quick, very quick. She took one sheet and pressed it under blotting paper from the desk. Then she put it back like nothing had happened. Gideon's face did not change, but his hand closed around the back of a chair. Cressida saw it. She did not soften, not yet. And the inkstand? she asked. Elsie's breath caught. That was later. She said the copied hand would be better if the ink matched. I didn't understand. She took a small empty vial from her case. When she opened the silver inkstand, the lid stuck. She was angry. She forced it, and it slipped against the desk edge. Not loud, but enough. I saw the crack near the hinge. Cressida's fingers tightened around her cup. The fracture had not been an accident of age. It had been a mark left by theft, then ignored by the man who owned it, and noticed by the woman he accused. Elsie continued, faster now, as if truth had become a door she feared would shut. Some ink spilled on my cup. Lady Portia saw it and said I was careless. Later, when she had the copied account written, she made me hold the paper steady while she formed the signature. I did not write it, Your Grace, I didn't. But I was there. Who did write it? Gideon asked. Lady Portia. Not all of it. The account itself was copied by someone else, perhaps Lord Osric. The signature was hers. She practiced it for days. Honoria leaned forward. Did Lord Osric come to the house? Twice. He was nervous. He said the Duke would ruin him if this failed. Lady Portia told him the Duke had already ruined his wife in his own mind, and men only needed evidence for what pride had chosen. The words struck the alcove into silence. Cressida looked down. She did not want to see Gideon's face. She knew what would be there now. Pain, shame, the beginning of knowledge. None of it could erase the morning when he had placed papers beside her tea and waited for her to break. Gideon spoke at last. Can you make a statement before my solicitor? Elsie recoiled. No. Please, Your Grace, she'll destroy me. No house will take me. My mother depends on what I earn. I can't be known as a maid who speaks against a lady. Cressida reached across the table, not touching her, only placing her hand within sight. You will not be used and discarded again. Not by Lady Portia. Not by us. Elsie looked at her, as if kindness were more frightening than threat because it required belief. How can you promise that? Because I know what it is, to have one's name carried into rooms without permission. Gideon moved then, slowly, so Elsie would not startle. He took a card from his coat and placed it on the table. My solicitor will take your statement privately. Your employment reference will come from Alder-mere House, not from Lady Portia. If you wish a place in my household, it will be arranged. If you prefer service outside London, that will be arranged as well. Your mother's rent will be paid for 6 months in advance. Elsie stared at the card. Why would you do that? Gideon looked at Cressida before answering, and for once his gaze did not ask her to rescue him from his own guilt. Because truth should not cost the poorest person in the room the most. Cressida's breath faltered. She wished the sentence meant nothing to her. It did not. Honoria gave a small approving sniff. Reasonably said, for a man who has been criminally slow. Gideon accepted that, with a bow of the head. Elsie wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, embarrassed by the tears. I'll speak to the solicitor, but not in a room full of lords and ladies. I couldn't. You will not be forced, Cressida said. Your written statement may be enough to begin. Lady Portia has a letter, Elsie whispered. About me. She said it proves I took a brooch. Gideon's expression hardened. Then she will produce it, and we will examine it as carefully as she wished society to examine my wife. Elsie gave a small nod. The agreement was fragile, but it existed. That was enough for the moment. When she left through the side entrance, arranged by Barnes's laundress, Gideon remained in the alcove, with Cressida and Honoria. The untouched seed cake sat between them, absurdly ordinary, after ruin had been given a witness. Honoria rose first. I shall ensure the girl is put into the hired carriage without being followed. You two have 5 minutes. Use them better than you have used the last 2 years. She swept the curtain aside and left them alone. Cressida stood at once. Gideon did not try to stop her. Cressida, he said. No. She faced him fully. Do not apologize because evidence has made belief safe. The words entered him cleanly. He deserved them. I was going to ask what you want done next. That stopped her. She had expected regret. She had expected confession. She had not expected obedience to the shape of her will. Lady Portia wants a private reconciliation, Cressida said after a moment. She sent the invitation before we came here. That means she believes she can still control the final room. Then let me end it in that room. Her eyes sharpened. No. That is exactly what you must not do. Gideon went still. Tell me, if you stride in and crush her, society will say you protected your property. They may even call it noble. But they will still remember me as the wife who needed a duke to speak because her own word was not enough. He looked at her for a long breath. Then I stand with you, not ahead of me, not ahead of you, not over me, never again. The answer came too quickly to be strategy. It was almost a vow, and because it was almost a vow, she looked away before it could touch what remained unhealed. You may present what only you can present, and she said, your solicitor, your household logs, your custody of the forged account. But my name was wounded in public. I will not have it restored as a favor whispered by my husband. Gideon bowed his head. Not deeply, enough. Then I shall stand where you place me. Cressida looked back at him. The man before her was still the Duke of Alder-mere. The room knew it. London knew it. Every servant who opened a door for him knew it. Yet, for the first time, he seemed to understand that power could be offered without being used to smother. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. But it was the first plank laid across a very deep break. Good, she said. Then she drew on her gloves. Because the next room will not be kind, his voice lowered. No. She lifted the curtain and stepped out first. Then it will have to learn. Westmere Hall received Cressida, as if the house had been holding its breath since she left it. The journey from London had been long enough for silence to become another passenger in the carriage. Though Aunt Honoria made occasional comments on the state of the roads, the stupidity of fashionable malice, and the moral uselessness of men who required evidence before decency. Gideon rode ahead for the final miles, not beside the carriage, because Cressida had asked him to give her the approach without performance. He had obeyed. That obedience, more than any apology, unsettled her. Westmere rose from the damp green countryside with its pale stone front, long windows and terraces silvered by recent rain. It was not beautiful in the easy way of London houses. It was older, sterner, built to outlast grief and inherit it. Cressida looked at the entrance steps, where she had first stood as a bride, with gloves buttoned and hope-nose pulled so carefully inside her that even she had mistaken it for calm. Now the household waited in a restrained line. Mrs. Vale, Themis housekeeper, stood at the front with red-rimmed eyes and a spine like a church pillar. The servants bowed and curtsied when Cressida descended. No one cheered, no one wept. That would have been unbearable. Instead, Mrs. Vale said, "Welcome home, Your Grace," in a voice that made the word home both gift and question. Cressida paused. Home had once meant endurance, then absence. Now it stood before her, asking to be redefined. "Thank you, Mrs. Vale," she said. "I am here for the day." The housekeeper's face did not fall, but hope withdrew behind discipline. Gideon stood near the open doors, hat in hand, his dark coat damp at the shoulders. He did not reach for Cressida. He did not claim her arrival before the household. He simply bowed, not to the Duchess as society performed it, but to the woman whose permission he had not yet earned. "Her Grace will use the map room," he said to Mrs. Vale. "Lady Vale will require tea there." Honoria gave him a narrow look. "I require truth more than tea, but both will be accepted." A footman coughed once and recovered. Cressida almost smiled. Gideon did not, but something in his face eased for the space of a breath. They crossed the hall together, not arm in arm, not as strangers, but as two people walking along the edge of a bridge neither knew would hold. The map room lay at the east side of the house, where broad windows looked over fields, tenant cottages, and the line of trees beyond the old mill road. Cressida had spent many mornings there with estate ledgers spread across the table, while Gideon was in London, and Hargreaves looked offended by the idea of a duchess understanding drainage. On the central table now lay maps, account books, tenant petitions, repaired leases, receipts, and letters tied in groups with narrow ribbon. Gideon had arranged them not as a display of power, but as evidence of labor, her labor. Cressida saw Mrs. Dern's cottage account first. the repaired roof, the winter coal allowance, the rent reduction that had kept 3 children housed. Beside it lay a note in Gideon's hand, recently written. Her Grace was right. Delay would have cost the estate more than mercy. Cressida touched the edge of the paper, only the edge. Why are these here? She asked. Gideon stood on the opposite side of the table. Honoria took a chair near the window, close enough to chaperone and far enough to let the wound speak. Because I called your work duty when it was devotion, he said. And I called your silence composure when it was loneliness. Cressida's fingers withdrew from the paper. That is a handsome sentence. His eyes lowered briefly. I have earned your suspicion of handsome sentences. Yes, the word was not cruel, it was true and therefore heavier. Gideon accepted it. Then I shall be plain. The estate stands steadier because of you. The household remains because of you. Tenants I barely noticed survived winters because you noticed them. I had the benefit of your care and mistook it for the natural order of things. Most men do when a woman makes survival look graceful. Honoria murmured, accurate. Gideon glanced toward her. Lady Vale, I deserve that and more. You do. Continue. Cressida looked out the window. The fields beyond the glass were familiar enough to hurt. Why show me this now? Because I do not want you to return to a house that denies what you gave it. You assume I am returning? No. The answer came quickly, almost sharply, then softened. I hope you will consider whether returning can mean something different from what it was. She turned back to him. Different how? Gideon drew a folded paper from the table and laid it near the estate map. I have instructed Bellamy to halt any further petition unless you direct otherwise. The settlement terms will be separated from any request for silence. Westmere accounts are to be open to you in your own right. Hargreaves will answer to you on household and tenant matters, or he will leave. If you choose never to live here again, your authority over what you saved will still be acknowledged. Cressida stared at the paper. It was not romance. It was not poetry. It was not a man kneeling in a fit of remorse and expecting tears to wash him clean. It was structural, practical, late. Perhaps because it was late, it wounded and steadied her at once. You think authority repairs trust? No, I think trust without authority left you defenseless. The answer found something in her that had not been touched by apology. She hated that he had learned the right lesson only after breaking the heart that had tried to teach it gently. And Lady Portia? She asked. Bellamy has Elsie Tarrant's statement. Wilkes found the household entry noting Portia's weight in my study. I have the blotting paper from my desk and the copied account Osric produced. Your aunt has named the subscription book. Osric's debt notes were confirmed this morning by a man who expected discretion and received my name instead. Honoria gave a satisfied nod. Useful if overdue. Gideon placed one final document upon the table. Portia has invited us to what she calls a private reconciliation. She expects to make you accept a quiet explanation that saves her and diminishes you. Cressida read the top line of the invitation. Her name was written as Dear Cressida, intimate enough to insult. She believes I am tired. Are you? Gideon asked. She looked at him then. Yes. His face tightened. Then let me carry the burden of the room. No. The word moved through the map room with absolute clarity. Gideon stilled. Honoria set down her teacup. Cressida lifted her chin. That is the test you keep failing. You think love means standing between me and the world. Sometimes it does. But not when the world has been taught that my own voice is unreliable. I did teach it that, he said quietly. Yes. He came around the table, slowly. Not close enough to trap her. Close enough to be honest. Then tell me where to stand. The simplicity of it nearly undid her. She had expected argument. She had expected a duke's instinct to command the final confrontation. He was offering position instead. Not surrender exactly. Something more difficult for him. Restraint. Beside me when your evidence is needed, she said. Behind me when my name is spoken. Silent when I answer for myself. Clear when you answer for what you did. A faint tremor moved through his breath. I can do that. Can you? I don't know, he said, and the admission was rougher than pride. But I'll do it because you asked it, not because I'm certain of myself." Her eyes burned. She looked away toward the old map of Westmere pinned along the far wall. Villages, cottages, lanes, woods, water. She knew the shape of this estate better than she had ever known the shape of her husband's heart, because land declared its needs plainly. Men did not. Gideon moved once, and when she turned back, he was on one knee, not dramatically, not with a hand pressed to his heart. He knelt on the worn carpet of the map room as if lowering himself were the only honest height left to him. Honoria inhaled, but said nothing. Cressida felt the room tilt. "Stand up," she said. Gideon looked at her. "Cressida, no, not here, not as payment for what you have discovered. Private regret is not enough when public harm remains." His face changed with pain, but he rose at once. That, more than the kneeling, mattered. He obeyed even when obedience denied him the comfort of abasement. "You are right," he said. "I know," she replied, and this time Honoria almost smiled. A silence followed. It was not empty. Cressida looked down at the table. The evidence waited in neat stacks. The house waited beyond the door. London waited with its sharpened teeth. Her marriage waited somewhere she could not yet bear to look too long. She placed her gloved hand on the invitation. "We will go to Lady Portia's room." Gideon nodded. "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon." She chose the battlefield. That was her mistake. He did not smile, but his eyes warmed with something like pride and sorrow braided together. "And mine? Yours was thinking I needed rescue more than respect." He bowed his head. "Then tomorrow I will remember." Cressida gathered the invitation and looked once more around the map room at the ledgers, the repaired accounts, the proof of all she had been before anyone thought to defend her. As she moved toward the door, Gideon stepped aside to let her pass first. She paused on the threshold, feeling the old house behind her and the coming room ahead. "This time," she said, "I shall not enter as the accused." Lady Portia Selwyn had filled her drawing room with exactly the wrong people. She had meant to gather witnesses who preferred polish to truth, women who could be guided by a lowered voice, men who disliked scandal unless they were allowed to enjoy it from a safe chair, and a few titled friends whose presence would make cruelty look like concern. By 3 o'clock, the room glowed with candlelight, despite the pale afternoon beyond the windows. Tea had been poured, untouched cakes arranged, and chairs placed in a circle that looked social until Cressida saw the empty seat near the center. It was not a seat. It was a dock. Portia came forward in lavender silk, softer than morning and more calculated than innocence. "Cressida, dear," she said, extending both hands. "You came. I hoped we might put an end to this distressing confusion before anyone suffers further." Cressida did not take her hands. "Then we have the same purpose, though not the same method." Aunt Honoria entered behind her with her stick and the expression of a woman who considered most of London undereducated. Gideon came last. He paused just inside the threshold, not at Cressida's side, not yet. He waited until she chose where he should stand. She moved to the empty seat, placed one gloved hand on its back, and remained standing. Only then did Gideon take his place a few feet behind her right shoulder. The gesture was small. The room understood it. He had not brought her to be judged. He had come where she had allowed him to come. Lord Osric Fenwick stood near the mantel, pale and handsome, his eyes moving too quickly between Portia and the door. Mr. Bellamy, Gideon's solicitor, sat at a side table with a leather case, looking grave enough to make several ladies suddenly regret attending. Portia noticed him and faltered for less than a breath. "A solicitor seems unnecessary for a private reconciliation," she said. Cressida looked at the pamphlet folded on the tea table. So did printed insinuation. "Yet here we are." A murmur passed through the room. Portia recovered. "If you insist upon making this formal, perhaps His Grace should speak first. It is, after all, his house whose dignity has been injured." Gideon's voice came low and clear. "Her Grace will speak first." Portia's smile chilled. "How progressive. How overdue," Honoria said. Cressida opened the small portfolio she carried. Her hands were steady because she had decided they would be. Several days ago, Lord Osric Fenwick produced copied estate accounts and letters said to be in my hand. Those papers were used to suggest that I betrayed private matters of Westmere Hall. She laid the forged account on the table. This is the signature offered as proof. Lady Caverley leaned forward, unable to help herself. Cressida continued, "The final stroke of Marley is wrong. That was noted yesterday. Today we discuss how it became wrong." Portia gave a sad little laugh. "Must we endure penmanship as theatre?" "No," Cressida said. "We shall move quickly to theft." The word struck the room sharply. Osric flinched. Portia did not, which told Cressida she had been expecting worse and preparing calm. Mr. Bellamy opened his case and placed a green leather book on the table. Several women recognized it at once. "The charity subscription book," Cressida said. "My full signature appears on the first page." Lady Portia retained the book after the committee meeting. Portia lifted her chin. As hostess of the committee, naturally. It provided a sample. Bellamy placed a blotting sheet beside it. "This was recovered from His Grace's study," Cressida said. "It bears reversed impressions of copied strokes in the same blue-black ink used for Alder-mere estate ledgers." Gideon stepped forward only far enough to be seen. "That ink was kept in my silver inkstand. Lady Portia was left alone in my study long enough to access it. My household log confirms the visit." Portia's eyes flashed. "You would take the word of servants against a lady?" "I take the word of truth against anyone," Gideon said. "I failed to do that once. I will not fail again." The room quieted. Cressida felt the words, but did not lean on them. She looked at Osric. "Lord Osric, your debts were settled in part 3 days after Lady Portia's musical evening. Mr. Bellamy has obtained the note from the lender. Lady Portia's name appears as guarantor." Osric's face strained. "I was not paid to injure anyone." Honoria snorted. "No, you were refinanced into dishonor. Very modern of you." A nervous sound moved through the guests, not quite laughter. Portia turned on Osric with a look so swift and cold that the room finally saw the woman behind the hostess. "Lord Osric is confused," she said. "He often is." "I'm not confused," Osric said, fear sharpening his voice. "You told me the Duke already believed her faults. You said all I had to do was bring what looked like proof, and he'd do the rest." The silence after that was enormous. Gideon did not defend himself. That was worse for Portia than anger. His face had gone pale, but his voice was steady. "And I did." Cressida turned slightly. Their eyes met. He did not ask forgiveness from her gaze. He accepted the truth of what Osric had said before the whole room. Portia stepped back from the pianoforte. "This is absurd. A desperate man will say anything." "A frightened maid said less and proved more," Cressida replied. Bellamy unfolded a statement. "Elsie Tarrant, formerly in Lady Portia's service, has sworn that Lady Portia practiced Her Grace's signature from the subscription book, removed ink from the Duke's study, and damaged the silver inkstand while doing so. Her statement is witnessed." A countess whispered, "The maid." Portia's face hardened. A dismissed servant accused of theft. Gideon placed a second paper on the table. The alleged theft concerned a brooch later found in Lady Portia's own dressing room inventory. "I have the copy." The accusation was prepared for use if Elsie spoke. For the first time, Portia had no immediate answer. Society watched the silence with widening eyes. It had come for Cressida's humiliation. It was receiving Portia's exposure instead. Cressida closed her portfolio. "You wished me to accept blame privately so you might remain respectable publicly. You mistook quiet for weakness, Lady Portia. Many people have." Portia's composure broke at the edges. "You think this makes you beloved? You are still the wife he doubted. You are still the woman he sent away. Even if I fall, you cannot make that beautiful." The words landed exactly where they were meant to land. Cressida felt them. She let herself feel them. Then she answered, "No, I cannot make it beautiful. I can make it true." Gideon moved then not to shield her, but to stand in the open space beside her. He looked first at the room, then at his wife. "I believed forged letters because they confirmed my fear. I allowed gossip to punish Her Grace before truth could defend her. I placed legal papers before her and called it prudence when it was cowardice. Every person in this room will understand this clearly. The Duchess of Alder-mere did not betray my house. I betrayed her trust. No one breathed loudly enough to be heard. Gideon turned fully toward Cressida. Slowly, before the people who had whispered over pamphlets and teacups, he lowered himself to one knee. Not as a spectacle, not as a demand, as a man surrendering the height he had abused. Cressida's throat tightened, but she did not move toward him. He kept his gaze lifted to hers. "I won't ask you to return because I am ashamed," he said. "I won't ask you to forgive me because I have told the truth at last. I ask only for the right to spend what remains of my life earning the name you signed when I did not deserve it." Portia made a faint sound of disbelief. No one looked at her. That was her punishment beginning. Cressida looked down at the Duke of Alder-mere, kneeling on Lady Portia's carpet, and she remembered the breakfast room, the black ribbon, the ink, the ring laid aside. She remembered waiting 2 years to be seen. Now everyone saw her, and the sight did not heal everything. It only made healing possible. "Stand up, Gideon," she said softly. He did because she asked. She faced the room. "I accept the truth spoken here. Forgiveness will be slower." Gideon bowed his head, as it should be. Bellamy gathered the documents. Osric sank into a chair as if his bones had forgotten pride. Lady Portia stood alone beside the pianoforte, surrounded by guests already deciding which invitations they would not send. Cressida turned to leave. This time, no one blocked the door. Gideon did not follow until she had crossed the threshold. He did not reach for her arm. He did not claim a victory. Behind them, the drawing room that had been arranged to reduce her became the room where her name was restored, and every whisper left inside it belonged to someone else. For 3 weeks after Lady Portia Selwyn's drawing room fell silent, London performed the little funeral it reserved for women who had mistaken social power for virtue. No bell tolled. No announcement appeared in the papers. Yet invitations failed to arrive at Portia's door with the precision of punishment, and the same ladies who had once accepted her tea with murmured admiration now discovered prior engagements whenever her name was mentioned. Lord Osric Fenwick was removed to the countryside by a furious elder brother, his allowance cut to a figure too small for vanity and too large for true suffering. Mr. Bellamy placed Elsie Tarrant in service with a respectable widow in Kensington, and Gideon paid 6 months of her mother's rent without permitting his name to appear on the receipt. Cressida learned these things in Bath, not from gossip sheets, but from letters that arrived every 3rd morning in Gideon's hand. He did not fill them with pleading. That restraint did more damage to her defenses than begging would have done. He wrote of actions taken, accounts corrected, servants protected, and false accusations withdrawn. He wrote that Hargreaves had resigned after discovering that the new order of Westmere Hall required respect for the Duchess's authority, as well as obedience to the Duke's. He wrote that the broken latch on Mrs. Dern's cottage had been repaired before rain entered again. He wrote, "Once, only this, the house does not ask for you. It waits." Cressida folded that letter and did not answer for 2 days. Aunt Honoria watched from across the breakfast table with the patience of a hawk pretending to be porcelain. On the 3rd morning she said, "You are not required to return because a man has finally learned grammar in the language of remorse." Cressida looked up. "I know, do you? Yes, good. Then if you go, go because you choose the life, not because he has made loneliness sound poetic." Cressida touched the edge of Gideon's last letter. "I am not certain I choose the life." Honoria buttered her toast. "Then choose an afternoon. Women ruin themselves by trying to decide eternity before luncheon." That was how Cressida came again to Westmere Hall, not as a bride, not as an accused wife, and not as a woman carried back by public apology. She came in her own carriage, with Barnes beside her and Aunt Honoria following in another, because she claimed 2 hours without supervision was too generous for any repentant duke. The countryside had softened into spring. Hedges showed green. Lambs moved like scraps of cloud against the fields. Westmere rose ahead with its old stone face, washed clean by recent rain, less forbidding now, or perhaps Cressida was less willing to be intimidated by stone. Gideon waited on the steps alone. No row of servants had been arranged, no symbolic welcome, no performance. He came down as her carriage stopped and opened the door himself, though the footman was already there. "Cressida," he said. Her name sounded different in the open air, less like a claim, more like a question. "Your Grace," she replied, and saw the faint pain cross his face before he accepted it. "The map room is ready if you still wish to see it." "I do." He offered his arm. She looked at it, then at him. "Not yet." His hand lowered at once. "Of course." They walked inside together with space between them. The hall smelled of beeswax, wood smoke, and fresh flowers, but the flowers were simple white narcissus in a bowl, not roses arranged to flatter sentiment. Mrs. Vale curtsied at the far end, her eyes bright, and Cressida inclined her head with more warmth than ceremony. She would speak with the housekeeper later, not now. The map room waited with sunlight spread across the long table. The ledgers were stacked neatly. The estate maps had been rehung. Near the center, on a square of dark velvet, sat the silver inkstand. The crack had been mended by a fine seam of brighter silver, visible but smoothed, like a scar honored rather than hidden. Cressida stopped at the threshold. For a moment she was back in the breakfast room, watching black ink cross a page while her own heart learned how quietly it could break. Gideon did not speak. He let her look. That too was new. At last she entered and stood before the table. "You had it repaired, yes. You did not replace it." "No." He kept his hands behind his back. "I thought of doing so. Then I realized replacement would be another form of cowardice. I do not want this house, pretending the crack was never there." Cressida ran one gloved finger near the silver seam without touching it. "Mended things are not the same as untouched things. No, some people resent that. I am trying not to be one of them." She looked at him then. The room held all their old silences and none of their old excuses. "If I remain Duchess of Alder-mere, it will not be as I was. I do not want what we were." His voice was quiet. "What we were made. You lonely and made me blind. I will not be punished with silence when you are afraid. No. I will not have estate decisions treated as indulgences granted to keep me occupied. They will be yours by right, not indulgence. I will not have protection used as another word for control. No," he drew a breath. "If I forget, you will tell me. If you forget, I may leave." He accepted that without flinching. "Then I had better remember." The answer was not grand. It was better than grand. It left her free. Cressida turned toward the maps, where Westmere's cottages, fields, lanes, and woods lay inked in careful lines. "And forgiveness?" he asked, so softly she might have pretended not to hear. She did not. "Forgiveness is not a door one opens because society approves of the key. I know. I can give you truth today. I can give you willingness to begin. I cannot give you the woman who waited at the staircase 2 years ago." Gideon's face changed. Grief moved through him, clean and unresisted. "She deserved better than me." "Yes," Cressida said. "She did." He bowed his head. The quiet after that was not cruel. It was honest enough to stand inside. When he looked up, he said, "May I court my own wife then?" The question surprised her. A small breath escaped, almost a laugh, though tears stood too near it. "That sounds improper." "It is probably the most proper thing I have ever asked." "And what would such courtship involve?" "Letters you are not obliged to answer. Walks you may refuse. Dinners at which I listen. Estate meetings where I do not pretend patience is the same as respect. And, if permitted, the occasional hope that you might one day call me Gideon without sounding as though you are granting a reprieve." Her eyes burned. "You ask carefully now. I should have begun that way." Cressida looked down at her left hand. The wedding ring was in her reticule, wrapped in a handkerchief. She had brought it without deciding why. Now she understood that she had not brought it to return to the old marriage. She had brought it to decide whether the circle could mean something chosen instead of endured. She took it out. Gideon went utterly still. She held the ring in her palm, feeling its familiar weight. You do not put this on my hand, she said. Not today. Perhaps not ever again. If I wear it, I do so myself. His voice roughened. Yes, Cressida slid the ring onto her finger. It passed the knuckle and settled where it had once felt like duty, then loss. Now it felt like a question she had agreed to answer slowly. Gideon did not reach for her. He waited until she extended her hand. Only then did he take it, carefully, as though trust had weight and could be bruised by haste. He bowed over her gloved fingers but did not kiss them. The restraint trembled between them, more intimate than touch. Behind them, Aunt Honoria's voice came from the doorway. If you two have finished rearranging the moral structure of marriage, I should like tea. Cressida turned, startled into the first true smile Gideon had seen from her in longer than he deserved to count. He looked at it as a starving man might look at bread, and had the sense not to reach too quickly. By late afternoon, Cressida sat at the map room table with the repaired inkstand before her and the first estate order awaiting signature. It concerned Mrs. Dern's Lane, which had flooded every autumn for 12 years because every steward before her had called drainage too costly and every tenant had been too powerless to argue. Cressida read the order, amended one phrase, and dipped the pen into the blue-black ink. Gideon stood beside her, not behind the desk, not over her shoulder, but at her side. Ready? He asked. She looked at the mended silver seam, then at the open map, then at the man who had learned at last that standing beside a woman was not the same as owning the ground beneath her feet. Yes, she said. I'm ready. She signed her name with the final stroke, lifting lightly upward, unmistakable and entirely her own.